You are watching Wolfe Street. I am your host, Smith. Remember, every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Which part of the world are you watching from? Subscribe, hit the like button, and join the mystery. Let's drive the story. Chapter 1. The shot on 35th Street at 9:18. On a Tuesday evening in October, I went into Nero Wolfe's office with a newspaper clipping in my hand and an item of gossip in my head that I knew would annoy him enough to interest him. He was behind his desk, in the red leather chair that had long ago surrendered any hope of independence, with a book propped against the lamp and his eyes not on it. Wolfe seldom fidgeted, but there are degrees of stillness, and I could tell he was listening past the walls of the old brownstone to the sounds of the street outside. West 35th Street at that hour offered its usual orchestra, a truck changing gears somewhere to the west, a cab horn registering moral protest, footsteps on the pavement, and the muted city. Breath that never entirely stops. I said, "The neighborhood has found a new entertainment. It happens nightly, requires no ticket, and may end in murder if everybody cooperates." He looked up. "Archie, when you open with nonsense, I assume the facts are weak. Sometimes nonsense is the fact." I put the clipping on his blotter. Read. He picked it up between finger and thumb, as if the ink might be contagious. The headline announced that for 3 nights running, at exactly 9:10, a single gunshot had been heard on West 35th Street between 8th and 9th Avenues. No body had been found, no window broken, no slug recovered. The article's reporter, being a man of imagination and poor discipline, had added that each morning after the shot, someone of prominence received a sealed envelope delivered by messenger. That was why the block had begun to whisper that the bullet itself was carrying a message. Wolfe read it through, laid it down, and pressed it once with his palm. Idiocy. Which part? All of it, the article, the whispers. The phrase, "The bullet itself is carrying a message." Poetry offends you. Bad poetry offends me. Good poetry is too rare to waste on bullets. I sat stopped by this afternoon and gave me some names. First note went to a banker named Nathan Voss at Metropolitan Union Bank. Second, to Emil Crofton, treasurer of the Harbour Foundation. Third, to Felix Tormey, a retired alderman with a talent for surviving old deals. Nobody has shown the police the notes, but everybody denies being alarmed with unusual vigor. He closed his eyes, which is one of the ways he listens best. What do the notes say? Rumor supplies, versions. One source claims a warning. Another says one read, "You have been marked." A third says, "3 remain. By tomorrow it will be the book of Revelation." And the police. Kramer has men on the block tonight, though not enough to bankrupt the city. Wolfe grunted. "If your curiosity is active, go outside at 9:10 and hear the noise. Then come back and be concise. That injures me. I can hear a noise and be expansive. Go." At 9:04, I was on the stoop with my hat on and my coat collar up. The wind had turned sharp and had collected smells from half the island. Gasoline, damp stone, cigar smoke, and roasting chestnuts from the avenue. The block looked normal if you didn't inspect it, but inspection was the point. 2 women near the corner were conducting a conversation with one eye on the time. A doorman across the street stood as if waiting for a parade. A man by a parked sedan had his door open and his head tilted. Nobody wanted to appear curious, and everybody failed. I walked 6 paces east, then west, then settled near our own steps. If trouble was going to choose a spot, I preferred it close enough to my own front door. At exactly 9:10 the shot came. It was a true gunshot, not a crate dropping, not a tire bursting, not one of those urban noises civilians promote into violence because they need exercise for the nerves. It was sharp, hard, and close enough to flatten the air for an instant. Heads snapped around. One of the women squealed. The man at the sedan ducked before he remembered he was in public. Then nothing followed. No scream, no crash, no running feet, no second shot. I went to the curb and looked both ways. Nothing. No shattered window, no one sprinting from a doorway. A taxi rolled past too slowly. the driver craning his neck with the shamelessness of his trade. Across the street the doorman spread his hands at me in a gesture that meant either, "Did you enjoy it?" or "This city is going to hell." Possibly both. Then our front bell rang. I was up the stoop in 3 jumps and into the hall. Fritz Brenner appeared in the dining room doorway, displeased in advance, and from the office Wolfe's voice came, deep and controlled. "Archie, at once." I went in and found a man standing before Wolfe's desk. He was in his 40s, medium height, carefully dressed in dark blue with silver beginning at his temples, and the face of a man accustomed to committees, signatures, and being obeyed by persons who considered themselves his equals. He held hat and gloves in one hand. In the other he had an envelope. He turned to me. "Mr. Goodwin." "Yes." He shifted his eyes to Wolfe. "Mr. Wolfe, my name is Lawrence Berin. I was advised by an officer at the corner that if I wanted intelligence and discretion on this block, I should come here. I am in no mood to evaluate his sense of humor. This was delivered to me 10 minutes ago." He handed me the envelope. It was cream, stock, sealed, addressed in ink to Mr. Lawrence Berin. I opened it and removed a single folded sheet. Wolfe said, "Read it." I did. "The 4th shot is nearest. Speak, or the 5th will collect." No one in the room moved for a second after that. Then Berin said, "At 9:10, as I was leaving my room at the Churchill, I heard what could only have been a gunshot from the street." A few minutes later the clerk handed me this. The messenger had gone. Wolfe put out his hand. I gave him the note. He read it, then looked at Berin with the still concentration that makes many clients begin talking more than they intended. "Why?" Wolfe asked. "Did you come here?" "Because my office is 2 blocks away, because this note refers to a 4th shot. Because the previous incidents occurred on this street, and because I know your name. Why should the note concern you?" His mouth tightened. "I had hoped you might tell me." "That is not a satisfactory beginning." "Sit down." Berin sat in the red leather chair opposite the desk. I went to my own desk, got a notebook, and uncapped a pen. He glanced at me and seemed slightly reassured by the ordinary business of writing things down. Wolfe asked, "What is your occupation?" "I am Executive Secretary of the Harbour Foundation." That was one click. Saul's afternoon rumor had connected the second note to the Foundation's treasurer. "Not the treasurer," Wolfe said. "Number yet you receive a note. Why?" "I don't know." "Do you have enemies?" "Of course. I administer money." Enemies with a taste for melodrama. If so, I had not catalogued them. Wolfe ignored the attempt. "How many people knew you would be at the Churchill tonight?" Berin spread his fingers. "My office staff, the hotel, a number of acquaintances, anyone who had asked in the past 2 weeks. Why are you living there?" "My apartment is being renovated." He answered quickly and too smoothly. "It might have been true, but I have spent enough time among liars, witnesses, and clients to notice when a sentence has been polished before use." Wolfe said, "Did you know of the earlier notes?" "Yes, one for certain. Emil Crofton, our treasurer, received one yesterday morning." "What did it say?" "He did not show it to me, but he quoted it. The 2nd shot is not for you, but it concerns you." That made a pattern. The unknown author wanted his arithmetic appreciated. What did Mr. Crofton think of it? He said it was vulgar nonsense. "And you?" I advised him not to mention it to the trustees unless he wanted to encourage panic and stupidity. "Did he mention it anyway?" "I don't know." Wolfe leaned back slightly. "What links you, Crofton, and these other recipients?" Berin paused, and in that pause I heard the first true note of reluctance. Possibly nothing. "Popfoo." Berin took a breath. "The Harbour Foundation has recently been the target of private assertions concerning the handling of one restricted housing trust created by Calvin Harbour before his death. Assertions by whom no formal complaint has been filed." That was not my question. He met Wolfe's gaze. "By persons who have not yet chosen to identify themselves openly." "Assertions of what?" "That funds intended for one purpose were diverted to another before Mr. Harbour died. and that documents were adjusted afterward. Were they? Number, he answered too quickly again. Wolfe heard it too. Your haste, Wolfe said, does not strengthen your denial. Berin's face cooled. Mr. Wolfe, I came here because I have been threatened, not because I choose to defend my bookkeeping to a stranger. You came here because you lack alternatives, Wolfe said calmly. If you dislike the conditions, you may leave. Berin did not leave. That also told us something. I put in, who else connected with the Foundation knows about these assertions? Crofton 2 trustees, perhaps 3. Our council, possibly others by gossip. Any name attached to the original complaint, number any dismissed employee with a grievance. There are always dismissed employees with grievances. That's the best answer you've given. Wolfe looked at the note again. Bring Mr. Crofton tomorrow at 11. Bring his note, if he still has it. Also bring a list of those connected with the harbour matter, including council, trustees, and any person who might benefit from embarrassing the Foundation. Berin frowned. Have you accepted the case? I have not decided. Then why should I assemble documents and people? Because someone is firing guns to decorate your correspondence. That should interest you even if I do not. That got the smallest possible smile out of him. He stood, put on his gloves, nodded to me, and went out. I followed him to the hall, opened the front door, and watched him descend the stoop and head east with the air of a man who had discovered the city contained one more enemy than it had at dinner time. When I returned, Fritz announced supper. Wolfe rose at once. Men have postponed sleep, love, and homicide for him less easily than he postpones a meal. Fritz served cold, sliced pheasant, celery hearts in sauce, potatoes browned exactly enough, and beer for me. Wolfe gave the pheasant the attention due a reasonable civilization. For some minutes the only sound was silver on china, and Wolfe's occasional murmur to Fritz, which counted as praise because Fritz understood his dialect. Then I said, "You're taking it." He cut a potato into 2 exact parts. I am considering it. The notes amuse you. Number, they annoy me. The gunshot interests you? Moderately. The fact that the 4th note came to a man who walked in here before the police reached him interests you more than moderately. He swallowed and dabbed his lips. Yes, I said. You think the shots are real but may not be aimed at anybody. That is possible. A firearm may be discharged for sound alone. Even blanks, properly managed, can educate a neighborhood. So the sound and the notes might be connected only by timing. Yes, or connected by design. But the design matters more than the noise. Someone wants selected recipients to believe they are being counted down. He frowned at me. Do not dramatize until we know whether drama is warranted. But you think the sequence means something? Certainly. The 1st note went to Voss, the 2nd to Crofton, the 3rd to Tormey, the 4th to Berin. Either the order itself has significance, or the sender wants them to think it does. Both possibilities are useful. After supper, we returned to the office. Wolfe took beer. I took coffee, and made a show of reviewing bills, while actually watching him examine Berin's note under the desk lamp. The house was quiet. Above us, the orchid rooms would be dark, except for whatever glow Theodore Horstman permitted himself while inspecting leaves and roots like a suspicious deity. At 10:07, the front bell rang again. I muttered. That will be Kramer, proving the police can move when offended. It was. Inspector Kramer came in with his hat on until he remembered he was indoors, removed it with a jerk, and glared at Wolfe. Did Lawrence Berin come here tonight? Wolfe lifted his beer. Good evening, Mr. Kramer. Did he? Yes. What did he want? To consult me. About the notes. Yes. Kramer planted both fists on the desk. Then I want to know what he said. I've got 3 previous recipients playing marble, mouth a 4th one, running to you, and another damned shot on this block. I'm not handling this blind while you sit there collecting secrets. Wolfe regarded him with mild distaste. Mr. Berin reported that after hearing the shot at 9:10, he received an anonymous note reading, "The 4th shot is nearest. Speak, or the fifth will collect. He also reported that Mr. Crofton had received one reading. The second shot is not for you, but it concerns you. Kramer blinked. He had expected resistance and got data which always unsettles him for a second. What's it about? He snapped. Possibly disputes connected with the Harbor Foundation. What disputes? Assertions concerning the handling of trust funds. Who made them? I do not know. And Berin, he knew less than he should and more than he wished to admit. Kramer's eyes shifted to me and back. You taking it? I have not decided. Well, decide fast. Because if another shot goes off tomorrow night, I'll flood this block with men, and I won't have one of your private errands tangling my work. Kramer gave that the reception it deserved, which was none, and stalked out. When the front door had slammed, I said, You're getting generous in your age. He already knew enough to be tiresome. I shortened the process. At 10:31 the house was, as still as old wood, thick carpet, and settled habits could make it. I was at my desk. Wolfe was at his. No one spoke. Then something hit the front room floor, not a shot, a hard, blunt thud. I was up and through the hall at once, with Wolfe behind me. The front room lamp was on. The room was empty, except for one object on the carpet near the center table, a revolver. I stopped dead. Wolfe stopped behind me. The gun was a small blued revolver, and even before getting close I could see one chamber had been fired. Tied to the trigger guard with white string was a folded card. I crossed to the front window. It stood open 2 inches at the bottom. I turned. That window was shut. Yes, somebody tossed this in from the street. Evidently. I crouched, careful not to touch either the gun or the card. On the outside of the card, in block letters, was written, for Nero Wolfe. I looked up. That should improve your mood. You read it. I unfolded the card and read the 6 words inside. The 4th shot was yours. For a moment neither of us spoke. Our revolver thrown into Nero Wolfe's front room on West 35th Street, after a note naming the 4th shot and a warning of a 5th. That was not neighborhood gossip any longer. That was a hand laid on Wolfe's own door. He stood without expression, which in him can be more alarming than anger. Then he said, in a voice so level it had turned dangerous, Archie, close the window, then call Mr. Kramer. I shut the window and went to the phone. Behind me, Nero Wolfe remained where he was, looking down at the revolver on his carpet, as if Manhattan had committed not merely an offense, but an impropriety. And for Wolfe, that could be worse. Chapter 2, A House That Should Not Fire. Inspector Kramer arrived with Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins, a photographer, a fingerprint man, and the compressed fury of a public servant summoned at night to witness a fresh insult to reason. He stopped in the front room, stared at the revolver on the carpet, then at me. You touch it. Number. He looked at Wolfe, who had installed himself in the big chair by the lamp with the grim composure of a judge forced to hear a case beneath him. You certainly not, Wolfe said. Kramer grunted and motioned to the fingerprint man. The revolver was photographed, dusted, and lifted with ritual care. The card tied to the trigger guard was bagged. The open window was examined, the sill inspected, and the carpet studied as if it might confess before dawn. Pearlie, who usually notices things because he actually looks at them, was the first to spot what mattered next. Inspector. He was standing at the office door, peering inside. We joined him. High on the wall above the globe, just to the right of the bookshelves, a fresh puncture showed black in the plaster. Pale dust had drifted down the wall and settled on the table below. Kramer stepped closer, craned his neck, and muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." I said, "You may be, but that hole is new." Pearlie pointed. Something else. Under one brass foot of the globe's stand, flattened against the polished wood of the side table, was a folded square of paper. Kramer used a pencil to slide it free and unfolded it. He read it once to himself, and then aloud. At 9:10, the house speaks truth. That was enough to chill even a crowded room. It took what had been nuisance and made it intimate. Kramer swung on me. You didn't see this. The note. Number. I was occupied by the revolver. Somebody had just thrown into the front room. And the hole. I don't inventory Wolfe's walls every 15 minutes. He looked at Wolfe. A shot was fired in this house. Wolfe's eyes were narrowed to yellow slits. So it appears. Then we search it. By all means, Wolfe said. My comfort has already been violated. Proceed to my dignity. That got him no answer except action. Kramer ordered it. And within minutes the brownstone was being worked through room by room. The office first. Desk drawers, chairs, window latches, bookshelves, rug, wastebasket, my desk, Wolfe's desk. The mantel, the side table, and the surrounding wall all got attention. No pistol was found, no cleaning rag, no discarded note, no stray cartridge. With a revolver that last emission meant little. But the police were annoyed enough to resent even physics. The hall and front room followed. Then the dining room and kitchen, where Fritz received the search the way a duke might receive tax assessors. One patrolman opened a cupboard full of preserves, and Fritz said in a cold voice, "Those apricots have committed no crime." The patrolman shut it at once. Pearly, to his credit, suppressed a grin. Theodore Horseman came down from the plant rooms in a dark robe and slippers, wearing the expression of a man dragged from a superior civilization into a vulgar one. "What is this?" "Polis business," Kramer told him. "That phrase," Theodore said, "nearly always precedes clumsy shoes. No one's harming your orchids." "You are not qualified to promise that," Wolfe said. "Theodore, stay available and stop improving the atmosphere." Theodore looked offended, which in him is the natural face, and remained. The search went upstairs. The plant rooms were inspected under Theodore's resentful supervision, then bedrooms, attic, and at last the cellar, where the coal bins were poked through, the furnace room checked, and every shelf and corner inspected for weapon, intruder, or some clever contrivance that might explain how a gun had been fired from a house that seemed not to contain one. Nothing, no pistol, no hidden man, no powder. Blackened device. No evidence that anyone had entered and remained. By 1 o'clock the brownstone had been searched with more thoroughness than affection. And Kramer had exactly what he hates most: activity without result. He returned to the office, where Wolfe sat as he had sat for nearly an hour, immense and motionless, his gaze on the bullet hole above the globe as if by sheer concentration he intended to embarrass it into explanation. "Now we account for everybody. I got my notebook." Wolfe could have spoken, but when facts can be delegated, he prefers to keep his lungs for judgments. "From 9 to 9:15, I said. The people in the house were Wolfe, me, Fritz, Theodore, Saul Panzer briefly, and a visitor named Miles Braden." Kramer's head jerked. "Who?" "Miles Braden, male, around 38, narrow face, worried eyes, cheap overcoat, trying to be respectable. He came at 8:40 wanting to see Wolfe on private business. And you mention him now. You hadn't yet taken attendance." Kramer bit that back because Pearly was there, and because his temper, though active, is not entirely self-destructive. "What business?" "Harbor Foundation." That sharpened him at once. "Connected to the notes." Apparently he said he had information. Wolfe spoke. "He had fragments, evasions, and appetite. Whether he also had information remains uncertain." Kramer turned to him. "From the top." Wolfe glanced at me, so I did the work. Braden waited in the front room. Wolfe saw him at 8:56. I was present for most of it. Braden said he had once done clerical work, connected with a firm that had represented Calvin Harbor. He hinted there were papers. He hinted certain people were being warned, in order. He was nervous, sweating lightly, and watched the clock too often for innocence. What exactly did he say? I checked my notes. He said, "Somebody is counting them out, and when the count ends, there won't be any need for notes." Pearly wrote that down, Kramer asked, and Wolfe asked who. "Them were." "Yes." Braden said he wasn't sure enough to name them unless he had protection. "Meaning money," Wolfe said. "Possibly," I said. "Also possibly meaning fear," Kramer said. "When did he leave?" 9:08. And where did he go? I let him out the front. He turned east. You followed him. Number? He glared. Of course not. Wolfe said, Mr. Kramer, this is a private detective's office, not a net for nervous mediocrities. Kramer ignored him and went on. Saul, here for 3 minutes around 8:50, I said. He brought word that Lawrence Berrin's account of the earlier note to Crofton was solid, and that Sorrell, the bankman, had left work early and wasn't home. Then he went. Fritz. We called Fritz in. He stood erect, hands at his sides, with the severe patience of a man who sees no reason to explain himself to officials after midnight. He had been in the kitchen from shortly after 9 until the shot, then serving supper, then clearing. No. He had not gone to the office between 9 and 10:30. No, he had heard the shot clearly. No, he had not smelled powder. No, he owned no firearm. He preferred instruments suited to nourishment. Theodore's answers were equally plain and equally touched with insult. He had been in the plant rooms from before 9 until Fritz called him down. He had heard the shot through the floor. No, he had not gone to the office. No, he did not own a revolver. He considered revolvers a confession of poor planning. That left Wolfe and me. Kramer looked at me. Where were you from 9:08 to 9:10? In the hall. Then on the stoop. I was outside when the shot was heard. Wolfe. In the office, I said. Kramer turned. You were here alone? For a brief interval, Wolfe said. And you heard the shot? Yes. From where? Wolfe's lips tightened. If I knew that with certainty, you would already know it too. The ballistics man came in then with the slug recovered from the wall in a small envelope. Medium caliber, deformed, but usable. The revolver would need testing. He went out again, leaving Kramer with more information and no more understanding. He pointed at the note on the desk. What does it mean? At 9:10, the house speaks truth, I said. It means our anonymous correspondent likes melodrama and has a shaky grasp of metaphor. Wolfe shook his head. Number, it means he wants one proposition accepted, that tonight's 9:10 shot originated inside this house. Kramer frowned. Why? Because he says the house speaks truth at that time. The phrasing joins house, time, and statement. He is not merely threatening me, he is asserting a fact and supporting it with theater. You don't believe it? Wolfe's eyes hardened. My house does not fire guns. That landed in the room with weight. To Kramer it was stubbornness. To me it was more. Wolfe's brownstone was a domain of order, schedule, appetite, orchids, books, and rules. For somebody to use it as a prop in a public trick was not merely inconvenient. It was insolence, Pearlie said carefully. Could still be some device. Inspector, timer, trigger arrangement, something that's been removed. Kramer turned on him. From where? Pearlie spread his hands. If I knew that, we'd have it, I said. Another possibility. The shot heard at 9:10 came from somewhere else, same as the previous nights. Then later somebody put a bullet in the wall, slipped the note under the globe, and at 10:31 tossed the revolver through the front room window. Kramer looked at me. Later when? Between 9:10 and when we found it. Who gets into this office, fires into the wall, plants a note, and gets out without being seen? That, I said, is the delicate point. Wolfe nodded. The difficulty is access. Anyone attempting such a maneuver required either opportunity within the household or extraordinary luck, Kramer said. So we are back to the people in the house. Yes, Wolfe said, or to an assumption that one of your men should not make merely because it is available. Kramer planted both fists on the desk. I make assumptions because I need suspects, and I avoid them because I need accuracy. They glared at each other. I have seen that performance often enough to appreciate its polish. Finally Kramer straightened. Braden, I want him found before breakfast. You should have him, Wolfe said. He wished to tell too much, and not enough. Men of that sort either hide badly or talk early. Kramer grunted at Pearlie, who went out to set the machinery moving. The room had thinned by then. The photographer and fingerprint man were finished. The uniformed men had carried away what could be carried. The house, though restored to us in principle, felt less ours than it had 3 hours earlier. An office wall had a bullet hole in it. A revolver had lain on the front room carpet. The air itself seemed to have admitted strangers. Kramer walked once around the office, stopped at the globe, and then faced Wolfe again. One more time, at 9:10 a shot is heard, same as the previous 3 nights. Sometime later we find a bullet hole in this office wall, and a note saying the house speaks truth. At 10:31 somebody throws a revolver with 1 chamber fired through your front room window with a card for you reading. The 4th shot was yours, and nobody in this house can tell me how any of it happened. That, I said, is the shape of our embarrassment. Wolfe nodded. With one correction, it is not merely embarrassment, it is invitation. Kramer stared. Invitation, yes. Mr. Berin comes to consult me about the 4th note. Within 2 hours my office acquires a bullet hole, my globe a message, and my front room a weapon. Someone wishes to place me inside the sequence. Why? Wolfe's voice went lower. Either because I am meant to interfere, or because I am meant to appear to interfere. Kramer took that in. You think somebody's using your name? Not yet, but they are certainly using my address. That was good enough to quiet even him for a second. Then Theodore, who had been inspecting the bullet hole as if it were an insect blight, said, If the house has been taught to speak, it has been taught falsely. I looked at him. That's almost useful. Wolfe's gaze stayed on the damaged wall. Yes. There was a pause. Then he said, very clearly, If my house has spoken, then someone has taught it a language of lies. No one interrupted. Even Kramer had sense enough for that. Wolfe went on. I do not permit lies in this room when I can prevent them. I certainly do not permit them through plaster. Kramer snorted. That a theory or a declaration? A declaration. I will investigate. Good, Kramer said. Do it fast. At my pace. Your pace is why I drink. That, Wolfe said, is a matter for your physician. Kramer put on his hat with the air of a man who might have preferred to throw it. I'll get Braden. I'll get the gun tested. And if another shot goes off tomorrow night, this block gets blanketed. He strode out. A uniformed man followed. The front door shut. Silence came back to the house, though not comfortably. Fritz looked around the office and said, It is indecent. Yes, Wolfe said. Theodore said, There is plaster dust. Yes, Wolfe said again. I went to my desk and sat. So Berin with the 4th note, Crofton with the 2nd, Voss and Tormey likely with the 1st and 3rd. Braden arrives trembling and leaves before 9:10. A bullet appears in your wall. A note appears under your globe. A revolver appears in your front room. And somebody wants the world to think your house fired the shot. Wolfe looked at me. Tomorrow morning you will get Saul at once. Mr. Berin and Mr. Crofton will be here at 11. Mr. Braden must be found before the police, either frighten him mute or let him evaporate. Anything else? Yes, no one touches that wall. I looked up at the small dark hole above the globe. Sentiment. Method. I started for the door, then turned back. He was still in the chair, broad and immovable. The damaged wall behind him, the note on the desk before him, and the old room around him like a courtroom that had been insulted. For the first time since I had known him, the brownstone itself seemed to have become one of his clients. And Nero Wolfe, seated like a judge of thunder, was preparing to hear its complaint. Chapter 3. The notes behind the bullets by 8:20 the next morning. I was at my desk with coffee, a notebook full of names, and the settled conviction that Nero Wolfe's orchids enjoyed privileges not extended to his staff. A gun had been thrown through the front room window, a bullet had appeared in the office wall, and the house itself had been accused of speaking at 9:10, but Wolfe had gone upstairs at 9 sharp as usual. Murder, blackmail, scandal, and municipal collapse must all wait while he attended to roots, leaves, and bloom. It is one of the principles by which he keeps sane. It is one of the principles by which the rest of us are tested. I had work of my own. The first 3 notes had to be traced. The trouble with anonymous notes is that everyone who receives one believes he becomes instantly dignified by secrecy. The first man thinks silence proves character. The second thinks it protects reputation. The third thinks it increases his value. By the time you get to the fourth, you are no longer investigating messages but vanity. So I used the telephone with the patience of a dentist and the morals of a card sharp. By 9:15, I had corrected 1 error and improved 3 facts. The first note had gone to a banker named Nathan Voss, assistant cashier at Metropolitan Union Bank. The second had gone to Emil Crofton, treasurer of the Harbour Foundation. The third had gone to Felix Tormey, a retired alderman who now lived very comfortably on old friendships and the habit other men had of consulting him unofficially. That gave us banker, treasurer, and retired politician. A tidy trio, if what you wanted was ordinary corruption and not yet a mystery. Jetting the actual contents took longer. Voss resisted first. His secretary told me he was in conference, indisposed and unavailable, in 3 ascending tones of falsehood. I gave her my sympathy, my name, and the information that if Mr. Voss preferred not to receive a visit from Inspector Kramer, a reporter, and 2 strangers with good hearing, he might spare me 30 seconds now. The banker came on the line. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, in the voice of a man who believed caution was a form of virtue, "I do not discuss private correspondence." "Then discuss public danger. Read me the note." "I decline. It contained a date and an address." Silence. That is one of the advantages of knowing something before the other fellow knows you know it. Finally, he said, "What else do you know, not to be bored by delay?" Another pause. Then he read it, each word clipped and unwilling. "The 14th of April, 1937, 118 Barrow Street. Remember what was certified." I repeated it. He confirmed it and hung up as if cleanliness depended on speed. Crofton was harder. He had a dry, superior voice and the kind of temper that had spent years balancing figures and finding people untidy by comparison. I reached him through Beren's office, identified myself, and got nowhere until I mentioned that Wolfe had already seen the pattern and disliked being kept waiting. That did it. Crofton's note read, "The 2nd of June, 1940, 41 Orchard Lane. You balanced what should not have balanced." He would say nothing else, except that Orchard Lane was in Queens, and that if I had further questions, I should submit them in a more civilized format than a telephone line. Tormey was different. He was at his club on Lexington, and when I got him, he sounded almost pleased to discover that life was still capable of producing a private detective before noon. "Goodwin," he said, "you work for Wolfe." I endure for him. That amused him enough to make him talk. His note had read, "The 19th of September, 1938, 9 East Hook Wharf. The permits were carried by hand." I asked where East Hook Wharf was. "Brooklyn waterfront," he said. Or was. Half of Brooklyn used to be things nobody remembers until there's trouble. That gave me 3 notes and 1 problem. I copied them onto a sheet and stared at them. The 14th of April, 1937, 118 Barrow Street. Remember what was certified. The 19th of September, 1938, 9 East Hook Wharf. The permits were carried by hand. The 2nd of June, 1940, 41 Orchard Lane. You balanced what should not have balanced. 3 dates, 3 addresses, 3 different reminders. At first glance, they seemed to belong to separate worlds. A banker and a certification. A retired alderman and hand, carried permits. A treasurer and suspicious arithmetic. The only thing they shared was the nasty little air of men being reminded of something they had hoped time had eaten. At 10:18, Saul Panzer arrived. Saul never entered a room. He simply reduced the amount of uncertainty in it. He came in wearing a grey suit that had no opinions, sat down, and looked at the sheet on my desk. "Those them?" "Yes." He read them once. "Ugly. That's because they're efficient, any news. Kramer found Miles Braden at 6:50 in a furnished room on West 51st. He didn't run. Men who don't know where safety is seldom do. You talk to him." Briefly. He says he came here last night because he got scared enough to stop pretending he was detached. That sounds like him. Saul glanced at the notes again. Barrow Street and East Hook Wharf were both tied to Jonas Cle. That got my attention. Who? He looked at me as if checking for damage. Builder, 5 years ago. Fast permits, fast contracts, quick friends downtown. Then there was a bribery inquiry, and he collapsed in the hearing room before he could explain anything useful. Dead before the scandal had finished feeding. Jonas Cle, I said. And these addresses were his. Aunts, or held by corporations that were his in everything but stationery. I haven't checked Orchard Lane yet, but I'd bet my lunch it belongs too. Before I could ask more, the office door opened and Wolfe entered from the hall. He had been upstairs with the orchids, and therefore was prepared to face humanity only because routine demanded it. He crossed to his desk, saw Saul, saw me, saw the sheet, and sat. His eyes went to the copied notes. Well? I handed him the paper. He read the 3 lines once, then again more slowly. Saul gave him the Cle summary. Wolfe listened without interrupting. When Saul finished, Wolfe looked at me. The addresses, Barrow Street and East Hook Wharf, tie to Cle, according to Saul. Orchard Lane probably does, Saul said, checked it on the way over. Orchard Lane was also held through a Cle corporation before transfer. Wolfe grunted. He looked down at the notes again. Then he closed his eyes. That is always a signal. Sometimes it means impatience. Sometimes digestion. Sometimes the machinery has engaged. After half a minute, he said, "The addresses are primary." I said, "I thought the accusations were." Number the phrasing differs by recipient because the reminders differ. The addresses remain the constant. Therefore, the sender assumes each man will recognize the place before he decodes the sentence. Saul shifted slightly. Meaning. Meaning the note is not merely, "I know what you did." It is, "I know where you stood when you did it." I said, "Barrow Street for Voss, East Hook Wharf for Tormey, Orchard Lane for Crofton." Yes, properties once owned by Jonas Cle, each tied to a different function, banking permits, accounting, not random places, stations. That settled into me with a useful chill. "The notes aren't threats," I said. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Number, they are summonses." That sat there on the desk between us. To Saul's credit, he did not speak for a second. Then he said, "Summonses to what?" "First to memory, then perhaps to obedience," I said, "or panic." "Panic is a byproduct," Wolfe said. "The sender is counting on recognition." The bell rang. At 11 sharp. I brought in Lawrence Berin and Emil Crofton. They had arrived together but not in harmony. Berin was controlled, well-dressed, and carrying his nerves under discipline. Crofton looked like a man who had once trusted ledgers to defend him and was beginning to suspect they were less loyal than numbers ought to be. They sat. Wolfe wasted no time. "Mr. Crofton, your note." Crofton produced it. I took it, compared it to my copy, and handed it to Wolfe. "Exact," Berin said. "You already know the others." "Yes." Crofton gave a tight little glance. "How?" Wolfe said, "By preferring efficiency to delay." That did not please him, which in Wolfe's system usually counts as success. Wolfe laid Crofton's note beside the copies of the others, and then lifted the note Berin had received the previous night. "The 4th shot is nearest. Speak, or the 5th will collect." "The first 3 notes," he said, "contain dates, addresses, and keyed recollections. The 4th does not. Therefore, the sender assumes Mr. Berin either needs no reminder or has already recognized the sequence." Berin asked, "Recognized it as what?" Wolfe looked at him. "Jonas Cle." Neither man answered. That was answer enough to begin with. Crofton adjusted his glasses. "Cle has been dead 5 years." "Yes," Wolfe said, "which does not prevent him from remaining useful." Berin leaned forward. "You are saying the notes refer to Cle's old properties." "I am saying more. They refer to the recipient's roles in transactions connected with those properties." Crofton let out a dry laugh that had no humor in it. That is imaginative. No, Wolfe said. It is obvious. Before Crofton could sharpen that, the bell rang again. This time it was Saul bringing Miles Braden. Braden looked worse than he had the night before. He was thin to begin with, but daylight had shaved more off him. His brown suit hung like an apology. His face had the exhausted grey of a man who had spent the night revising fears instead of sleeping. When he saw Barron and Crofton in the office, his eyes widened and then darted to Wolfe like an appeal. Wolfe said, "Come in, Mr. Braden. Sit down. You have delayed enough." Braden sat on the edge of the chair nearest my desk. Wolfe said, "Last night you came here with fragments. Today you will provide sentences. You knew Jonas Cle." "Yes. He employed you. In the office files, copies, errands, whatever was needed." "When?" 3 years, off and on, until the hearings." "Until he collapsed," Wolfe said. Braden swallowed. "Yes. Why did you come to me?" Braden's hands twisted together. "Because I recognized one of the addresses." "Which one?" "Barrow Street." Wolfe nodded. "Go on." "Cle kept duplicate files outside the office sometimes. Only the bad ones, or the ones he said needed air around them in case the walls got curious. I carried a packet once to a basement office on Barrow Street. There were ledgers there." Crofton snapped. "Nonsense." Braden flinched. Wolfe did not even look at Crofton. "What was in the ledgers?" Wolfe asked. "I didn't read much. Columns, initials, property names, payments, dates. But when I heard about the first note, I remembered the address. Then after the second and third, I got scared." "Why?" "Because somebody was counting the old places, counting the people tied to them," Barron said sharply. "Did Cle ever mention me?" Braden looked at him and then away. "Yes, and Crofton." "Yes, and Voss Tormey." Braden nodded. Wolfe said, "Functions, not friendships. Tell me the functions." Braden licked his lips. "Tormey for permits, Voss for bank paper, Crofton because balances had to look right before certain transfers. Barron later, after Cle was already in trouble. Cle said Barron was trying to seal leaks with new paper over old." Barron stiffened. "That is false," I said. "It may be, but it's useful falsehood." Crofton snapped. "You're listening to a frightened clerk as though he were an auditor." "No," Wolfe said. "I am listening to a witness who remembers roles." That shut him up for the moment. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Mr. Braden, why did you wait 5 years?" "Because Cle was dead, and dead men usually stay that way." "And now?" Braden looked at the 4 notes on the desk. "Now somebody is walking him back into the room. That was not bad." Wolfe approved it with silence, I said. "So Barron's 4th note had no address because the earlier 3 had already made the pattern plain." "Yes," Wolfe said. "By then the sender no longer needed to name a property. The sequence itself served." Saul from the side chair said, "Which means Barron was meant to understand he stood next in line." "Exactly." Braden suddenly said, "Cle once said if anything came apart after he was gone, the places would matter more than the papers. That got all of us." Wolfe turned his head. "Why?" Braden frowned, digging backward into memory. "I don't know. He had been drinking, or he was scared. Maybe both. He said a place can hold a promise longer than a man." Wolfe made a small sound in his throat. That meant he liked the sentence because it was either true or useful and probably both. He leaned back. "The first 3 notes are keyed reminders addressed to men who perform distinct services in transactions, linked to Jonas Cle's properties. The 4th note, to Mr. Barron, omits the address because the count itself had become sufficient. The shot at 9:10 is the bell. The note is the summons. The recipient is expected to remember his place and wait," I said. "So the bullets are only knocking on the door." "Yes," Crofton said. "Summoned to what? A confession?" "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "Perhaps to payment. Perhaps to produce what remains hidden, or perhaps to gather." "Gather where?" Crofton asked with brittle contempt. at one of Cle's old properties. Wolfe looked at him. Do not underestimate melodrama merely because you prefer bookkeeping. Crofton's face colored. Berin said, You still haven't said who is sending them. Number. Then what have you actually established? Wolfe placed one hand beside the notes. That someone has gone to meticulous trouble not to frighten strangers, but to awaken accomplices. That Jonas Cle, though dead, still owns enough memory to move living men, and that the notes are not threats. He let that hang for half a second. They are summonses. No one contradicted him. Not Berin, not Crofton, and certainly not Braden, who looked as if the word had named the thing he had been too afraid to say. I got up to answer the telephone on my desk before it rang a second time. It was Kramer. He wanted to know whether Braden had talked yet, and whether Wolfe had stopped being obscure long enough to become useful. I told him, not yet, but we're making progress. That was true enough for police work. When I hung up, Wolfe was still looking at the 4 notes spread on the desk, as if they were not paper at all, but seats in a room whose meeting had been delayed for 5 years, and had now, by somebody's decision, been called back to order. And somebody, somewhere in New York, intended to ring the bell again at 9:10 Chapter 4. Jonas Cle's broken map, if New York has one talent greater than corruption, it is filing corruption so carefully that the paper begins to look respectable. At 9:10 that morning, Nero Wolfe was upstairs among the orchids, where the most serious vice is overwatering, and I was downtown with Sol Panzer in the Municipal Archives Annex, where old deeds slept in steel drawers and clerks guarded them as if memory itself were municipal property, which, in a sense, it was. We had come for Jonas Cle. By then, we knew enough to want more than names and rumor. The first 3 notes had contained dates and addresses tied to properties once held by Cle or one of his shell companies. The men who got them, banker Nathan Voss, retired Alderman Felix Tormey, and Emil Crofton of the Harbour Foundation, had each been reminded not merely of a time, but of a place. Lawrence Berin's 4th note had dropped the address but kept the count. Wolfe had already declared that the notes were not threats, they were summonses. So now we wanted the map. The clerk assigned to us had a long face and a short patience. He brought out the first bundle and said, If you misfile anything, I'll know. Saul said, That's a rare gift. The clerk declined to enjoy himself and went away. We opened the files. Jonas Cle had built warehouses, boarding houses, and cheap flats under names that sounded as though they had been invented by a man who distrusted anything memorable. West Harbor Improvement, Orchard Residential Holdings, Consolidated Wharf Storage, Civic Tenant Development, and a string of others with the same dead civic optimism. Each company owned a little, sold a little, borrowed a little, and dissolved just before curiosity became dangerous. He liked layers, I said. Saul, reading a transfer sheet without blinking, said he liked distance. That was better. Cle had not used shell companies for elegance. He used them so ownership and responsibility would never meet without an appointment. By 11:30 we had the first shape of it. 118 Barrow Street had been held by one Cle Corporation and sold in haste in April 1937, just before an inspection problem ripened. 9 East Hook Wharf passed out of another Cle company in September 1938, under circumstances hurried enough to leave 2 corrections initialed on different days. 41 Orchard Lane in Queens was conveyed in June 1940 by a corporation, so thin it might have been incorporated on cigarette paper. All 3 had something in common besides Cle. Each sale had been made fast, quietly, and shortly before Cle's troubles moved from gossip to inquiry. He was shifting risk, I said. Saul nodded. Before the weather broke. That was the right way to put it. Cle had seen trouble coming and started moving properties before the walls narrowed. Not to save buildings, to save himself, or try to. We found 2 more addresses as well, one on 12th Avenue, one near the Harlem River. Both passed through the same kind of paper fog. I wrote them down. Wolfe likes unnecessary facts, only if they later become necessary, and gathering them is part of my education. Then Saul found the better thread. He had 4 files open around him, and was studying them with the silent discourtesy he reserves for paper that thinks itself clever. "Archie." That tone means stop ornamenting the room and come over. He went. He had marked lines in pencil, witness blocks attesting signatures, delivery acknowledgements, Voss's bank certification on one file, Tormy's initials attached to a permit transmittal on another, Crofton on a balancing statement folded into the Orchard Lane closing, Berin, later than the rest, on a corrective memorandum attached after Cle's collapse, had already become yesterday's scandal. "Every one of them signed something," Saul said. I bent lower. "Not principals, not owners, but they touched the paper." Yes. That fit at once and unpleasantly. The notes had not merely reminded them of guilt in the abstract. They had recalled them to specific transactions and specific moments. Not main signatures, but the lesser marks respectable men rely on being forgotten: certifications, witness lines, transmittals, balancing statements, correction memos. The kind of participation that lives in margins and survives precisely because it seems too small to matter, I said. Wolfe will enjoy that. Respectable corruption always perks him up. Saul ignored me and tapped another file. "There's more." He pointed to a name I had passed over because it was too ordinary to deserve suspicion. Evan Pike. There he was in one transfer as witness, in another as recipient for replacement keys, in a third on a delivery acknowledgement attached to a side memorandum, in a fourth in the legal margin, attesting a lock change after closing. Not owner, not lawyer, not lender, not official. Just there, quietly, I straightened. "Who is Evan Pike?" "Dealer in fixtures and locks," Saul said. "Small shop on West 23rd. Been there 9 years, pays rent, minds his business, sells practical things to practical men, and he appears in all 4 chains." Yes, a banker, an alderman, a treasurer, and an executive secretary might all touch the same transactions from different angles. But a modest dealer in locks does not drift through 4 such files by accident. If he appears again and again, routine is carrying him. "You think he's our sender?" I asked. "Number." "Then what?" Saul looked back at the name. "Invisible." At 2:15, we were back at the brownstone with copies, notes, and enough dust on our cuffs to prove democracy. Fritz fed us sandwiches, with the expression of a man who disapproved of archives, but not of lunch. Wolfe had already eaten, of course. Civic decay never interferes with digestion in this house. At 2:40 we spread the files across Wolfe's desk, my desk, and one red leather chair that had to submit temporarily to documentary abuse. Wolfe read without speaking for nearly 15 minutes. That is one of the more educational sights in my profession. He reads financial records, poison analyses, menus, and ransom notes with the same grave courtesy toward facts and the same grave contempt for those who obscure them. When he finished, he leaned back, closed his eyes, and joined his fingertips. I said, "You are allowed admiration. We found Cle's paper maze." "No," he said. "You found pieces of the map he broke." "All right, Jonas, Cle's broken map." "Yes," Saul said. "The 4 men who got notes all signed papers tied to the sales." Wolfe nodded. "And Pike?" I asked. His eyes opened. "Mr. Evan Pike is the most interesting thing in the room." That was saying something, with Wolfe including himself automatically. "Because he's in all 4, I asked. "Yes, not prominently, not decisively, never in a manner that would attract a prosecutor or a reporter. Yet there he is, witness lines, key deliveries, lock changes, attestation, access, Archie, repeated access." Saul said, "Locks and routine." Wolfe nodded. "A clever criminal never hides in ink, he hides in routine." That was worth recording, so I did. Wolfe went on. "Men remember the banker who certifies, the politician who carries permits, the treasurer who balances, the executive who repairs records. They do not remember the man who unlocks, relocks, witnesses, delivers, and disappears into customary business." I said, "So Pike may know more than all of them." "Possibly. or he may only sell hinges. But a repeated witness line is not random, and a locksmith who recurs around hurried transfers is never merely decorative. He turned to me. Go see him, friendly. Civil until civility becomes wasteful. That gives him 2 minutes. Then allow 3. Saul supplied the rest. Pike was usually at his shop until 6:30. No clerk, no partner, widower, 1 sister in Newark, no visible extravagance, no useful police record, and no reputation except reliability. At 3:30 I went to West 23rd Street. Pike's shop was narrow, dusty, and honest, looking in the deliberate way some men arrange innocence by means of inventory. Glass cases held padlocks, latch sets, cabinet pulls, polished brass plates, and rows of hardware old enough to have acquired dignity. The place smelled of oil, metal, and old wood. A bell rang over the door when I entered. Evan Pike came out from the rear carrying a box of latch plates. He was spare, neat, and in his early 50s, with a long, mild face, rimmed spectacles, and the practical hands of a man who works for a living and dislikes announcing it. He looked more like a patient bookkeeper than a locksmith. Yes, sir. I'm Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe. That changed him slightly, not into alarm, but into caution covered quickly. What may I do for you? Talk. I am at work. That has happened to me too. He considered. Then led me to a cramped rear space with 2 chairs and a desk too small for ambition. We sat. I began politely because Wolfe had told me to, and because Pike did not look like a man who needed bullying to become evasive. Did you know Jonas Cle? I did business with firms that did business with him, personally. That was probably wise. He did not care for that. Why are you here? Your name appears in 4 transfer files, tied to Cle properties. Barrow Street, East Hook Wharf, Orchard Lane, and 1 corrective memorandum later on. He took off his spectacles, polished them, and put them back on. That bought him time and told me he wanted it. Eyewitness documents, he said. I delivered replacement locks. I was called when properties changed hands and keys changed with them. That is not criminal. Not by itself. What do you want from me? The reason your name keeps appearing in the margins while other men occupy the signatures. He gave me a faint smile. Perhaps because I was useful and discreet. That sounds practiced. It is true. I let that stand a second. Have you received one of the notes? That got him. Only a flicker, but enough. Are you expecting one? Do the addresses Barrow Street, East Hook Wharf, and Orchard Lane mean anything to you? I have invoices older than your necktie. Many addresses mean things to me. That's not an answer. It is the answer you are getting. He stood. Mr. Goodwin, if you have an accusation, make it. I stayed seated. If I had one, you'd hear it from a different man in a less comfortable room. He remained standing, I said. Jonas Cle sold those properties in haste before his troubles broke open. Every man who got a note signed paper tied to those sales. Your name is in all 4 chains. You handled keys, lock changes, witness lines, access. Somebody is reviving those transactions 1 address at a time, and if you tell me you don't know why, I'll believe you only enough to keep asking. He did not move. Then he said, I never signed anything false. That interested me because I hadn't used the word false. Men usually defend the accusation they fear, not the one made. I got up. Good, I said. Then come tell Wolfe that. I have no intention of. You do if you want to stay a man in the margins. Kramer already has your name. Once the police decide a locksmith witnessed 4 hurried Cle transfers and forgot to mention it, you become visible in the least pleasant way. He looked at me steadily. Is that a threat? It's weather. He turned away. Then back. The mild tradesman expression had thinned. Under it were nerves, and under those, something more useful, trained caution. At what hour? He asked. 5:30. I close at 6. Close early. New York will survive without brass hooks for half an hour. He almost smiled, which I disliked because it made him more difficult. All right, he said. 5:30. When I reported back, Wolfe asked only 3 questions. Had Pike denied knowing the recipients? Yes. Had he denied recognizing the addresses? Not directly. Had he volunteered anything unasked? Yes. He had said he never signed anything false. Wolfe grunted. Excellent, because truthful men say they did nothing wrong. Careful men say they signed nothing false. The distinction implies the paper may have been formally correct, while the transaction was not. That would be very Cle. Yes. Pike arrived at 5:30. Exactly. Wolfe notices punctuality because routine interests him almost as much as orchids. I took Pike's coat and showed him in. He glanced once around the office, saw the bullet hole above the globe, and did not comment on it. Another point for him, or against him, he sat in the red leather chair and folded his hands. Wolfe regarded him. Mr. Pike, you sell locks and fixtures. Yes, sir. You also recur in 4 property chains connected to Jonas Cle. I witnessed documents and handled locks. Yes, Mr. Goodwin reports that you denied signing anything false. That is correct. Wolfe nodded. Then perhaps you will tell me what was true. Pike was silent. Wolfe said. The properties were sold in haste. The 4 men who have received notes each signed papers tied to those sales. Your name appears in every chain, hidden in witness lines and margins. Someone is now reviving those transactions, 1 property at a time. Either you are merely an unlucky locksmith, or you were repeatedly useful. Which? Pike said quietly. Useful. There it was. To whom? Wolfe asked. To whoever needed doors opened, keys replaced, access recorded without fuss. Jonas Cle, yes. And later, a pause. Sometimes, others. Name them. Pike hesitated. Wolfe's voice hardened. Do not mistake my patience for abundance. Pike moistened his lips. People from Tormey's side once. Someone from Voss's office once. A messenger from Crofton twice. Never Berin directly. That tightened the room. I assume so. He kept copies of everything. Where? Pike looked at his hands. Separate places. He liked duplicate keys and duplicate paper. Barrow Street. Yes, that matched Braden. Anything else? There was a room over the wharf office too. Storage, they called it. Cle changed the lock twice in 1 month. Who had keys? Cle, me, for 1 day. Then not me. Who then? I don't know. That might even have been true. Wolfe leaned back. Mr. Pike, a clever criminal never hides in ink. He hides in routine. Jonas Cle understood that. Did you? For the first time, Pike dropped the mild shopkeeper expression completely. Yes, he said. The room went still. Good, Wolfe said. Then you also understand routine can be unraveled. You will remain available. You will now give Mr. Goodwin every property at which you changed locks for Cle in the final year before his collapse. Everyone if you omit a single address, and I discover it. I will place you directly between Inspector Kramer and his temper. Pike nodded once. All right. I got out a pad. For the next 20 minutes he gave me addresses, dates and lock changes. Barrow Street, East Hook Wharf, Orchard Lane, a boarding house on 12th Avenue, a warehouse near the Harlem River, a midtown office under a corporation name, 2 empty flats used briefly for storage, a basement room where Cle insisted on his own cylinder pattern, a broken map. Yes, but one whose pieces were beginning to fit. When Pike had gone, I looked at Wolfe. Well, he glanced at the list and then at the bullet hole above the globe. Now, he said, we know where the dead man expected to be remembered. Cheerful. Number. Do you think Pike is sending the notes? Number. Why not? Because he is too practiced at remaining secondary. The sender wants attention without exposure. Pike wants exposure least of all. Then, what is he? Wolfe's mouth tightened. A hinge. I looked down at the page of addresses and dates. And the door. He glanced at me. That, Archie, is what will open at 9:10. And because he said it in that tone, quiet, certain, and already offended by what lay behind it, I knew we had moved again. Not to the answer. Wolfe never pretends that. But to the mechanism. Jonas Cle's map had been broken before his death. Now somebody was putting it back together. One property, one note, and one routine at a time. Chapter 5. The clockwork gun by 10 o'clock. The next morning I had reached the stage of acquaintance with Evan Pike, where I disliked him on principle. That may sound hasty, but then haste is one of the few privileges left to a working detective. Pike had come to the brownstone on time, answered with care, admitted only what was already visible, and left behind the exact impression he probably intended. A modest tradesman who had been useful to questionable men without ever becoming one of them. Such people are dangerous in a double way. Either they know too much and plan to sell it dear, or they know just enough to survive and not enough to save themselves. Saul Panzer, who wastes neither words nor dislikes, seemed to share my opinion. We were headed back to Pike's shop on West 23rd Street. Friendly? Saul asked. Number, that's clearer than usual. I'm improving. The day was hard and bright, with one of those October skies that look scrubbed and still leave you unconsoled. Trucks rolled downtown like compressed bad temper, cabs moved with professional insult, and pedestrians had the forward lean of New Yorkers who had made peace with nothing except momentum. Saul and I turned into 23rd and found Pike's shop sitting where modest commerce had left it. Narrow front, glass full of locks and fittings, and the kind of sign no one notices twice. The bell over the door rang as we entered. Pike came from the rear, carrying a carton of latch plates. He was as he had been before. Spare, neat, dry-faced, in dark practical clothes, spectacles settled correctly, hands clean and unhurried. If worry touched him, it had not reached the skin. He saw Saul, paused one beat, and said, "Mr. Goodwin again?" "Yes, I got lonely." "And Mr. Panzer?" Saul nodded. Pike set down the carton. "What do you want?" "Routine," I said. "You know about it." That brought no expression except the faintest tightening near the mouth. He led us to the little rear space without inviting us to inspect the shop again, which of course made me inspect it. He did not offer chairs. Saul stayed by the door, hands in his coat pockets, looking at nothing in particular, and therefore at everything I said. "Do you know anything about the gunshots on West 35th Street? Number, did Jonas Cle ever use timers, mechanical releases, alarm triggers, or any device arranged to act without a man present?" That is an odd question. It's also the one I asked. "Number, do you sell timing devices?" "I sell locks and hardware." "Yes, and other practical things. Let's not start the day with piety." I stepped out of the rear nook and moved toward a rack I had noticed the day before and neglected because I had been too busy admiring Pike's innocence. It held 3 compact metal boxes fitted on plates, a pair of spring-wound timing units with dial faces under glass, and a narrow device with a striker arm and bracket mount. None of it looked designed for domestic life, unless the domestic life in question involved shutters, alarms, or discreet trouble. Pike moved quickly enough to tell me I had chosen well. "Those are not for casual customers," he said. "That's lucky, I'm not casual." I bent closer. One unit had a delayed release catch, another had a compact spring housing, and a wired arm that might pull, trip, or strike, depending on what a mechanic with a conscience shortage attached it to. A third was mounted to a narrow backing plate small enough to fit behind a frame, panel, or vent if the installer preferred secrecy to applause. Saul said, "Storefront shutters," Pike said, "and warehouse alarms, delayed closures, timed security releases." I looked at him. "Do they make noise?" "They can. Enough to sound like a gunshot." Number, that answer came too fast and sat too neatly. I smiled. "I didn't say by themselves." His face remained mild, but his eyes sharpened behind the lenses. Saul drifted a little closer to the rack. "Spring, delay catch, Release arm, Pike said. Commercial hardware. Anything is commercial, I said. If you charge properly. I turned back to him. Suppose a man wanted a firearm discharged at an exact minute without being present. Not often, and not repeatedly. Just once, cleanly, in an enclosed space. Could that be done? He said. I know nothing about firearms. That's not what I asked. I sell locks. That's also not what I asked. The jaw tightened at last. Small progress still counts, Saul said. You understand mechanisms. Most trades do. I nodded toward the timing rack. Ever install one behind a wall panel? Number in a vent, number in a concealed bracket. Number never. Not for anything improper. There it was again. Pike had a gift for answers that were either true or arranged to resemble truth so closely. They passed in dim light. I moved nearer, enough to make him decide whether to retreat. He didn't, dry-handed, steady-eyed, annoyingly prepared. Mr. Pike, I said. A shot went off inside Nero Wolfe's office. There's a bullet hole in the wall and a note under the globe. A later search found no gun, no intruder, and no obvious setup. That leaves mechanism, concealment, timing, and removal. You deal in 3 of those 4. Help yourself. He looked at me through the spectacles and said, You are making a great deal of coincidence. Number Wolfe already did that. I'm making a great deal of routine. That landed. Just a flicker, but enough. He knew he had been seen in the right light. I know nothing about a gun in Mr. Wolfe's house, he said. Fine, then know something about how a gun might be made to fire there. His gaze shifted once to Saul and came back. Saul's face was blank enough to qualify as public property. Finally, Pike said, A timer can release a spring can trip a lever can pull a trigger, but crude setups, jam recoil throws them. Line matters, mounting matters, and noise brings people. That was not the speech of a man innocent of mechanical imagination, I said. Go on. If a real firearm were used, he said carefully, it would need to be fixed securely. The line of fire would have to be known in advance. The release would need to be certain, and whoever arranged it would need confidence in the surroundings. What sort of confidence? That the sound would be heard, that the shot would be interpreted as intended, and that afterward the wrong thing would be looked for. That was very good. Too good, Saul said. And the weapon afterward. Pike hesitated. I said, yes, afterward. If you were foolish enough to attempt such a thing, Pike said, you would need some means of recovery, a second access point, a drop into a cavity, or an opportunity to return before a search reached the correct place. Hidden where? I wouldn't know, but you can guess. A wall recess. Behind a panel, in a vent, somewhere that gives concealment and line for one shot. I let that sit a second. You've thought about this. Number. I understand hardware. Same thing, with cleaner fingernails. He shut up after that. And there was no prying him open farther in the shop. Men like Pike can be pushed only until they feel the edge of danger. After that, they revert to varnish. We left him there among his locks and timed releases and took a cab uptown. In the cab, Saul said, he knows the trick. Yes. Maybe not that it was used in Wolfe's house. Number, but he knows how. He was too ready on recoil. And concealment, I said, and recovery. Saul nodded. Either he built part of it, or he's protecting someone who asked the right questions. Or both. At the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office with beer, papers, and the particular look that means lunch had been acceptable, but humanity had not recovered. Theodore Horseman was there too, by the shelves, looking as if the world had recently failed a test in botany and manners. I gave Wolfe Pike's performance from beginning to end. Saul added the parts he disliked most, which were naturally the useful ones. Wolfe listened with eyes half closed and fingertips joined. When we were done, he said, yes, that was all. I said, yes, what? Yes. Mr. Pike understands the mechanism. Whether he understands its use in this house remains open. That's a stingy sentence. It is exact, Theodore, who had been silent longer than was natural for a man whose opinions usually arrive before facts, suddenly said, "There was a sound." We all looked at him. "What sound?" I asked. "Last night, before the shot. Very faint." He frowned, irritated with memory for not having reported promptly. "Metallic." Wolfe's eyes opened fully. "When? In the office, or near it?" "I heard it through the floor while I was in the south plant room." "How long before the 9:10 shot?" "A little, half a minute. Perhaps less. I noticed it because I took it for a dropped spoon at first. But it was wrong for that. Sharper. A click." I stared at him. "Why in heaven didn't you mention it earlier?" "Because policemen were asking me whether I owned firearms." "That degrades recollection," Wolfe said. "Describe it." Theodore raised a hand delicately. A small metallic click, not loud, as if a bit of tension had been released or set. I felt the back of my neck tighten. Wolfe turned to me. "The vent." It took me one beat, and then no more. The office had 2 old ventilation grills built into the wall paneling, leftovers from an earlier heating arrangement that had gone obsolete before I acquired my first necktie. One was decorative now, or nearly. The other, lower and narrower, opened into a shallow service cavity behind the wall before joining a dead duct section. I was out of my chair, and over there with a screwdriver from my desk. "Lower," Wolfe said. I removed the screws, eased the brass grill free, and peered inside. Darkness, old dust, shallow depth, and on the inner wood edge a bright fresh scratch where something metallic had been mounted or scraped out. "Saul," I said. He came over, bent, and nodded once. "Recent." I sniffed dust. Stale air. "And maybe the faint ghost of machine oil," Wolfe said, "distance to the bullet hole." I looked up, traced the angle in my head from the vent recess across the room to the puncture above the globe. "Possible," I said. "Yes." Theodore sniffed. "Then the house did not speak. It was manipulated." "That," I told him, "is almost elegant." Wolfe ignored us. "Archie, reconstruct it." "A timing unit is attached. Spring wound, delayed release. Maybe a striker arm or pull mechanism. It is set to trip at 9:10. Theodore hears the metallic click just before discharge when the catch releases or engages. The shot goes off, producing the sound inside the office and probably carrying outward enough to be heard on the street," Saul said, "and the bullet hits the wall where it was meant to." "Yes, then later, before the search reaches the right place or before anyone thinks to, the weapon and timer are removed." "How?" Theodore asked. "Either from this room," I said, "by someone with a reason to be here unnoticed, or from another access point into the cavity." Wolfe nodded. "Good." I looked back into the vent. "That's why the house search found nothing. The right place was already empty." "Yes." I turned. "So now the mystery isn't how a gun fired at 9:10. "No," Wolfe said. "It's how the gunman knew exactly where we'd be looking afterward." "That sat in the room," Saul said. "He knew the search would be broad and stupid." "Conventional," Wolfe corrected. "Rooms, people, cupboards, floors, cellar, kitchen, plant rooms. Not hidden cavities, unless something prompts attention there." "And the revolver thrown into the front room later," I said. "Gave everybody a perfect false ending. Kramer could spend an hour marrying the wrong gun to the right wall." "Yes," Wolfe said. "The thrown revolver was not evidence, it was choreography." "That was good enough to write down too, and I did." I said, "All right. Somebody with access to the office before 9:10 mounts the weapon in the vent, sets the timer and leaves. The shot goes off on schedule. Later someone removes the apparatus, plants the note under the globe, if it wasn't already there, and finally throws a revolver through the front room window to direct us toward the wrong object." Saul said. "And that someone knows the house," I said. "How well?" "Well enough," Saul said, "to know Wolfe would be in the office before dinner. Well enough to know the first search would be of rooms and people. Well enough to know where a note under the globe would be discovered, only after the bullet hole was seen. Well enough to know Kramer would love a gun on a carpet more than an empty vent." Wolfe leaned back farther, eyes on the open recess. A stranger might devise the mechanism, he said. A mechanic might build it. But predicting where we would look afterward, predicting how this house would react to being violated, requires more than skill. It requires acquaintance. With you? I asked. With the house. That brought Pike back into the room at once. Routine, I said. Yes, but Pike wasn't here at 9:10. Not necessarily. Nor need he have been, Saul said. He could have taught the trick to someone who was. Wolfe nodded. I looked at my notebook. Archie, Fritz Theodore. Saul briefly. Miles Braden. Barron earlier, but not at the time. Crofton absent. Voss absent. Tormey absent. Pike invisible. The device did not care who was absent. It cared who understood the office well enough to place it and retrieve it. Miles Braden, I said. Possibly, Wolfe said. He watched the clock. He left before 9:10. He was nervous enough to perspire under ordinary questioning. Yes, that could mean he knew what was about to happen. Yes, or only enough to want distance from it. Yes. I stared at him. You do enjoy that word, when it remains accurate. Fritz came in with coffee for me, and beer for Wolfe, saw the removed grill, and stopped dead. What now? Engineering, I said. He looked from me to the vent with deep moral offense. In this house. Apparently, he said something in German that probably condemned both mechanics and their ancestors. Wolfe took the beer. Fritz, last night between 9 and 10:30, did anyone have reason to be in the office besides Mr. Goodwin and myself? Fritz thought. Number, I was in the kitchen, then serving. No one should have been here. No one should have, I repeated. Which is never the same as no one was, Theodore said. Your logic grows tiresome under stress. Thank you, Wolfe said. Archie, get Braden here again immediately. If Kramer objects, inform him he may attend if he can manage it without shouting. Saul, I want every sale or installation of timing hardware Pike handled in the past year. Not Locke's mechanisms find every customer with connection to Cle Properties, the Harbor Foundation, or anyone already on our list. Saul stood. All right, Theodore, Wolfe said. You will think harder about the click, interval, pitch, and whether there was one or two. Theodore looked insulted by the assignment, but accepted it. And me? I asked. You, Wolfe said, will stop admiring the trick and begin resenting the intelligence behind it. I already resent it. Not enough. That was Wolfe. Once the mechanism of a crime stopped amusing him and started insulting his order, the case acquired momentum of its own. I went to the phone and started with Kramer because courtesy occasionally pays. As I dialed, I looked once more at the open vent, the bright scratch inside, and the bullet hole above the globe. The problem had changed shape. We no longer had to wonder how a gun had fired inside the brownstone at 9:10. That part, ugly as it was, had become mechanical. A timer, a bracket, a hidden recess, a delayed trigger, a quiet recovery, and a false revolver thrown in later for confusion. The real question was nastier now. Whoever arranged it had not merely built a clockwork gun. He had built it for Nero Wolfe's house specifically, and had known with intolerable precision exactly how Wolfe, Kramer, and the rest of us would spend the next 2 hours looking the wrong way. Chapter 6. The man who arrived to be seen by 3 o'clock that afternoon, Miles Braden, was back in the red leather chair opposite Nero Wolfe's desk. And I had stopped regarding him as merely frightened. He was frightened, yes. He had the pale, pinched look of a man who had slept badly and revised his fears too often. His brown suit still hung on him like a compromise. His hands, clasped too tightly, showed more strain than his face did. But fear was not the whole of him any longer. He had crossed into the more dangerous condition, a man who knew he had been used, and had not yet decided whether admitting it would save him or finish him. Wolfe sat behind the desk, broad and motionless, with that calm, terrible patience he reserves for witnesses who have mistaken fragments for bargaining power. Saul Panzer was in the yellow chair by the shelves. I was at my desk with notebook open. The room was still enough to make the scratch of my pencil sound impertinent. Wolfe said, "Mr. Braden, yesterday you came here with fear, information, and economy. Today you will omit the economy." Braden swallowed. "I told you what I knew." "No," Wolfe said. "You nibbled. I dislike nibbling." Braden's fingers tightened. Wolfe went on. "Your arrival last night was too neat. You came just before 9:10. You stayed long enough to be remembered. You were frightened enough to seem harmless, and not frightened enough to stay. Then the shot. Then the staged evidence in my office. Your timing was excellent. Explain it." Braden looked at me, then Saul, then back to Wolfe. "I came because I was scared." "Of what?" "The notes. You had received one that landed cleanly." He had not expected Wolfe to open there. "Yes," he said. I sat straighter. Saul remained a statue. Wolfe said, "When?" "Yesterday morning." "Read it?" "I can't." "Why not?" "It's gone." Wolfe's brows moved a fraction. "Then recite it." Braden licked his lips. Then he said in a low voice, "Go to Wolfe, or be counted among the dead." I wrote it down. Wolfe merely nodded. "You obeyed," he said. "Yes." "Why?" Braden gave a short laugh that had no mirth in it. "Because after the other notes, a man who knows certain things doesn't ignore one like that. Do not generalize. Why did you obey?" Braden looked down. "Because Jonas Cle once told me that if trouble ever came after he was gone, the people who moved fastest would live longest. That is not enough. Number, then continue." Braden drew breath. "Because I didn't destroy everything." "That improved the room," I said. "A ledger, part of one." Wolfe nodded once. "Good, we begin," Braden said. "Cle had me moving files the week before the inquiry turned serious. Boxes, ledgers, carbons, envelopes. He was shifting papers from place to place, as if movement itself could save him. One night he gave me a brown ledger and told me to burn it." "Did he say why?" Wolfe asked. "Number," he said. "Some books tell stories, and some books tell times, and the ones that tell times must die first." That pleased Wolfe. It was visible only because he grew stiller. "Did you burn it?" he asked. "Most of it." "Most?" Braden's face tightened. "I tore out one page first." "Why?" He spread his hands helplessly. "Instinct, greed, fear. I had worked around Cle long enough to know that if he feared one page, one day someone else might fear it more profitably," Saul said quietly. "And you kept it?" "Yes, for 5 years." "Yes? In your wallet?" I asked. He nodded, folded small. "And now it's missing." "Yes." "When did you last see it?" "Last night, after I got back from here. I checked. It was still there." "And this morning?" "Had gone." I said. "Who had access to your room?" "Nobody." "That's a fairy tale for lodgers. The landlady has a key," he muttered. "Maybe someone else. I don't know." Wolfe said. "Describe the page." Braden shut his eyes. "Cream paper. Torn rough on one side. Dates in one column, amounts in another. Names or marks in a third. Some property notations on the left. What names?" "I remember 3, because they stood out. A payment to a judge, one to a clerk, and one to a man with no name. No name, just a notation." "What notation?" Braden opened his eyes. "Keeper of the hour." No one spoke for a second. Then I said, "That's either poetic or rotten." Saul said, "Probably both." Wolfe's gaze stayed on Braden. "Amounts?" "I don't remember exactly. Some hundreds, some thousands." "Dates?" "April 14th on one. September 19th on another. June 2nd on another. The same dates as the notes. That was not coincidence. That was design." "Properties?" Wolfe asked. "Barrow Street for one, I think. East Hook too. Maybe Orchard. You had this page in your wallet and did not mention it last night." Braden met his stare badly. I came to see whether you were real before I handed over something that could get me killed. Wolfe did not bother despising that aloud. If the page is gone, your value has already changed from possessor to witness. Braden stared. You think the note sent me here to be searched? Not searched, I said. Seen. Wolfe nodded. Exactly. That is the central indecency. You did not merely arrive here. You arrived to be remembered here. Braden's mouth moved and failed him. Wolfe continued. You came just before 9:10, spoke of Cle, displayed fear, and left. Then the shot occurred. Then my office acquired a bullet hole and a note. Your presence became part of the event, conveniently. Therefore, whoever summoned you here did not merely want your obedience. He wanted your appearance on this stage. Braden whispered. Why? Because you were carrying, or believed to be carrying, a surviving page. Because the sender wished to flush you into motion. And because once you were seen here, suspicion might drift toward you naturally. I said. Especially if the page vanished afterward, Saul added. And especially if the sender wanted Wolfe and Kramer both to remember Braden before remembering anyone else. Braden looked sick enough to satisfy a physician. Wolfe said, When did you first suspect someone else knew you had the page? Braden frowned. 3 weeks ago, maybe? A man stopped me outside a lunch counter on 9th Avenue and said, Some paper should burn better than wallets. I thought he was drunk. Describe him. I can't. Middle height, dark hat, grey scarf, ordinary. Excellent, Wolfe said. The city is full of him. Braden went on. 2 days later my room had been searched. Nothing gone, but the drawers were wrong. How wrong? I asked. Shirts disturbed. Razor moved. Little things. Saul nodded. Quick search. Then the note came yesterday morning, Braden said. Under my door. No envelope. You brought it here. Yes, in my wallet. And after you returned, Wolfe asked. I checked both the note and the page. They were still there. This morning. Gone, both. That sharpened the picture, I said. So whoever took the torn page also took the summons? Yes. Which means he either entered your room after you got back or had access to you before you noticed. Braden looked at me. I was asleep. Many crimes depend on that. Wolfe had closed his eyes. That is never idleness. When he opened them again, he looked at Braden with cold patience. Last night, he said, what did you expect to happen? Braden hesitated too long. Do not lie, Wolfe said. It saves only seconds. I thought maybe. Braden stopped, then forced it out. Maybe the note meant if I came here, I would be under your protection, that if I was seen here, whoever sent it wouldn't dare touch me. That is one possibility, Wolfe said. It is also the one you preferred. Yes. And another. Braden moistened his lips. That maybe whoever sent it wanted to make sure I was here when something happened. Yes. That cost him. A frightened man loses one kind of safety. The moment he admits he understood the trap even partially, I asked. Did you stop anywhere between your room and our stoop? A drugstore to use the phone. Whom did you call? Nobody. I picked up the receiver and put it down. I was trying to decide whether to come. That's pitiful enough to be true, I said. He ignored me. He was past offense. Wolfe said. Tell me again what was on the torn page, more carefully. Braden shut his eyes. 5 or 6 lines. One had J. And a payment. Judge, I thought because Cle used initials when he didn't want office girls curious. One said, Clerk outright. Another had only the notation Keeper of the Hour. I remember that because it sounded absurd. Property marks at the left. Bizet, maybe old dates too. April 14th. September 19th. June 2nd. I wrote fast, Saul said. A payment key. Yes, Wolfe said. Not a general ledger, an operational extract. Braden looked relieved to have his fear translated into accounting. Wolfe leaned back. A judge, a clerk, and the keeper of the hour. I said, You think the last one connects to the 9:10 business? Obviously. Because of the title. Because of the title and the pattern, a man paid not for permits, paper, or balancing, but for time, or for controlling the moment at which something occurs, Saul said. A mechanic, a scheduler, someone who handles sequence. Perhaps, Wolfe said, or the one who commands such a man. Keeper of the hour sounds theatrical. Our sender is theatrical, Braden whispered. Cle used nicknames for some people. Which helps only if we know which people, Wolfe said. Then he turned to me. Archie, Mr. Braden's room. You think the wallet was lifted there? I think the room will tell us whether the search was hurried, expert, or staged. Take Saul, inform Kramer afterward, not before. Braden leaned forward. You think someone may still be there? If so, I said, that would save us time. He sank back, Wolfe said. You will remain here. Am I under guard? Number under scrutiny. The distinction flatters you. I grabbed my hat. Saul was already at the hall door. Then Wolfe spoke again. One more thing. When Cle ordered the ledger destroyed, who else was present? Braden's face changed. He had held that back. No one, he said. Wolfe's eyes hardened. Wrong. Braden gripped the chair arms. I don't know who it was, just a man in the doorway for a second. Dark coat, hat on. Cle saw him and stopped talking. Did Cle call him by name? Number by title? Braden's breath caught, Wolfe said softly. Ah, Braden whispered. He said, not now, the hour can wait. No one moved, then Saul said, that's our phrase. Wolfe nodded once. Yes. Saul and I went. Braden's room on West 51st was exactly what frightened men can afford. Narrow, tired, and hoping not to be noticed. The landlady had a key and a suspicious conscience. Saul got past both. Inside, iron bed, bureau, chair, washstand, one window on an air shaft. The room had been searched by someone who worked quickly and knew what mattered. Drawers disturbed but not wrecked. Jacket lining pressed. Mattress lifted and dropped. The wallet sat on the bureau containing only loose bills, a receipt, and a subway token. Saul examined the door lock first. No force, key or skill. I checked the bureau. Bed, shoes, chair, and washstand. No note, no torn page. But in the wastebasket, I found a small strip of cream paper, torn cleanly from an edge, no writing on it, and close enough in stock to the anonymous notes to make my temper improve. I held it up. Saul looked once and said, bag it. On the mirror there was a dusty print. No use unless luck decided to become municipal. Otherwise, nothing. But the nothing had shape. Someone had entered with a key or skill, searched expertly, taken both page and note, and left enough ordinary disorder to make the victim doubt himself. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had not moved much, and Braden had not moved at all. That probably frightened him more than handcuffs would have. I gave the report. Saul handed over the strip of cream paper. Wolfe looked at it. Interesting. Because it matches the note stock? I asked. Because it suggests the thief handled or carried another of them while searching. Therefore, taking the page and taking the note were one design, not an improvisation. I sat. Braden was flushed to us, seen by us, then emptied. Yes, and the sender knew he would obey. Yes, because the note named you. Yes. I looked at Braden. He looked smaller now, which was both unfair and useful, Wolfe said. One final question. Why keep the torn page in your wallet rather than hidden elsewhere? Braden answered at once. Truth had become cheaper by then, because if I hid it, I'd keep going back for it. If I carried it, I always knew where it was. Wolfe grunted. And others knew where a frightened man would keep his last insurance. Braden shut his eyes, I said. So the page listed payments to a judge, a clerk, and the keeper of the hour. The dates matched the note addresses. Braden was sent here to be seen. Then his independent value was removed. Wolfe nodded, Saul said. The keeper of the hour may be our clockwork man. Yes. Or the one who ordered him. Also yes. I turned to Wolfe. You've got the look. What look? The one that means you hate someone you haven't named yet. That is because, he said, I have begun to admire the architecture and resent the architect. He leaned back and closed his eyes. The note summoned the signers. The shot summoned attention. Mr. Braden was summoned for visibility, therefore the sender is not merely reviving Cle's old transactions. He is arranging the living participants in present time as carefully as Cle once arranged paper. I said, like pieces. Yes. And the missing page, not destroyed yet, I think, retrieved. Why? Because it contains a title or identity the sender still needs either to protect or to confirm. Judge Clerk, Keeper of the Hour. The phrase explained too much and not enough. A man who keeps the hour might keep schedules, discharges, access, signals, meetings, or simply the exact moment at which old sins are made to wake up again. Wolfe opened his eyes. Archie, get me everything on judges, clerks, and hearing personnel attached to the Cle inquiry. Schedules, continuances, substitutions, court staff, especially anyone responsible for timing proceedings. That's cheerful. Number, but it is necessary. He glanced past me to the bullet hole above the globe. The man who arrived to be seen, he said, has now told us his function. He was not the message, he was the display case. Braden made a small sound that was not protest and not surrender. That ended the interview, but not the pressure in the room. We had moved past Cle's map, Pike's routine, and the clockwork gun in the vent. Now we were into another layer. The use of frightened men as timed objects. Miles Braden had come to Wolfe's house to ask for help. That part was true enough. The more important truth was uglier. Someone had told him to come, expected him to obey, wanted him seen, and relieved him afterward of the one torn page that might have made him dangerous. And somewhere in that machinery, like a hand on the hidden spring, was the unnamed man Cle had marked only as the Keeper of the Hour. Chapter 7. Keeper of the Hour. By 11 o'clock the next morning, Nero Wolfe had stopped treating Keeper of the Hour as a phrase, and had begun treating it as a trade. That was progress, though not the kind that improves the appetite. I was at my desk with notes from Braden, Pike, and 3 dead corporations that had once been Jonas Cle's respectable masks. Saul Panzer was in the yellow chair by the bookcase, with the face he uses when facts are either ripening or disappointing him. Wolfe sat behind his desk, immense and motionless, with his eyes half closed and his fingertips together. That posture has frightened murderers, clients, district attorneys, and me. It means he is not merely thinking, he is sorting the possible from the vulgar. The mistake, he said, opening his eyes, is to assume the title is dramatic. I looked up. You object to drama only when others enjoy it. I object to stupidity. A killer who names himself would likely choose something more flattering than Keeper of the Hour. Saul nodded once. Profession, then. Yes, Wolfe said. Not ego, function. That landed cleanly enough. Braden's missing ledger page had listed payments to a judge, a clerk, and one unnamed man marked only by that title. The nightly shot came at 9:10 with a precision that had ceased to be coincidence and matured into habit. The clockwork gun in the vent had required timing, mechanism, and a mind for sequence. A Keeper of the Hour, then, was not a poet. He was a man who lived by precision. I said, watchman, signalman, locksmith, alarm man, timing mechanic, stage manager, railway clerk, bomb hobbyist with civic ambition. Wolfe frowned. Do not scatter. I'm broadening the search. You're broadening the furniture, Saul said. Pike still fits. Yes, Wolfe said. Too well. That improved my spirits. You dislike him because he's convenient. I dislike convenience because it is often arranged. Evan Pike had a shop full of locks, fittings, and timing devices for shutters and alarms. He knew Cle properties, knew how a gun could be rigged to fire on delay, and had the dry-handed competence of a man who made mechanics behave. If Inspector Kramer wanted to arrest him, the city would not run out of reasons. But Wolfe does not trust perfect fits. He considers them insulting unless he has tailored them himself. I said, all right, if Pike is too neat, what's untidy enough to interest you? A second man, Wolfe said. one more purely mechanical. Saul shifted. Which for him counts as dramatic entrance. There was one. I stopped writing. Wolfe did not move. Saul said, Pike had a partner years ago. Not a legal partner, or not enough of one to leave much paper, but they worked together. Name? Calvin Rowan, called Cal Machinist. That improved the room instantly. What kind of machinist? I asked. The useful kind, Saul said. Custom brackets, release housings, altered lock assemblies, spring mounts, odd fittings for shutters and alarm setups, worked mostly in the back. Didn't deal with customers much, which is usually a recommendation, Wolfe said. Dates. Through the year Cle collapsed. After that, gone. Gone where? Saul spread two fingers. General opinion says South Georgia. Maybe. Carolinas. Maybe. One supplier said Florida, because he had no imagination. No one knows. Pike told people Rowan drifted. Why? Because drift is a convenient verb when you don't want to say vanish. That had shape, I asked Paulus. Nothing worth pride. A lodging, house complaint once. No conviction. A machinist named Dugan remembers him as the one who never talked, because talk wasted time. Another said Rowan could build any bracket from a sketch and improve the sketch while insulting it silently. Did Rowan work Cle properties? Not directly on paper, Saul said. But Pike's shop built unusual custom fittings to Cle, related addresses during the partnership years. Such as steel mounting plates, reinforced cylinder housings, timer brackets, delayed shutter releases, modified catches. I said, That's our keeper. Wolfe shook his head. Number, that is our temptation. Same thing with less honesty. That does not yet prove he wrote notes, chose recipients or staged appearances. Do not confuse a mechanic with an author. That was fair, and therefore annoying. I had spent part of the morning on court records from the Cle bribery inquiry, and had gotten little from them, except proof that old corruption leaves stains where modern filing clerks least expect them. There had been substitute hearing clerks, temporary schedule changes, a complaint about proceedings starting late, and one building signalman assigned for a month to repair a defective hearing room clock circuit. None of it had yet crossed back to Cle's property transfers or Pike's shop. But that, in itself, did not clear the ground. It merely left us more places to dig. At 12:15, I went to work on Rowan. The fastest path to a vanished man is usually through the people who are glad to see him go. In Rowan's case, that meant a former landlord on 27th Street, a supplier on 9th Avenue, a machinist who had once shared bench space with him for 6 discontented months, and a woman in a lunchroom who remembered him because he paid in exact coins and never looked at the pie by 3:30. I had enough to bring back uptown. Rowan had indeed existed, which in New York already counts as progress. He had lived in 2 furnished rooms over a dry goods store until 4 months after Cle's collapse. He had a cough in winter, a dislike of card games, and a habit of carrying wrapped metal pieces under his arm as if they were sheet music. He was good with springs, latches, and anything that had to release. Once and only once. According to the machinist, Rowan could build a delayed pull from junk and make it look factory. According to the supplier, Pike once referred to him in an invoice dispute as my timekeeper, which was close enough to interest Wolfe and far enough from proof to keep him mean. There was one more thing. Rowan had quarreled with Pike, not publicly, not with fists or police or broken windows, but the lunchroom woman, who heard more than the city credited her for, remembered one evening when Pike came in red-faced, and Rowan sat over coffee like a cold hinge. Pike said, "You don't disappear on schedule when money's moving." Rowan answered, "You don't talk in front when the back's doing the work." That was all she remembered, but it was enough to suggest not friendship but division of labor. When I reported, Wolfe listened without interruption. "So," he said at last, "Mr. Pike is the front, Mr. Rowan the back. Looks that way. And the quarrel? Could mean Rowan handled the devices and Pike handled the clients." "Yes." Wolfe leaned back. "Lock and hand," I said. "That sounds suspiciously like the note we haven't received yet." He ignored me, which saved me the embarrassment of being prophetic too early. At 5 o'clock the office was full enough for a meeting and empty enough to be dangerous. Saul remained. Theodore came down from the plant rooms and stood by the shelves with the look of a man giving society one last chance. Fritz brought beer for Wolfe and coffee for me, and disapproved of all living mechanics equally, Wolfe said. The title still bothers me. I looked up because Rowan fits. Because he fits in one dimension only, precision, mechanism, silence. Good, but our correspondent is not merely precise. He is selective. He chooses men by role, properties by memory, and moments by effect. That is not the whole talent of a machinist. Saul said, Pike plus Rowan could cover the hardware. Yes, the script belongs to somebody else. Probably, I said. Who knew Cle's arrangements from the edges? Not owner, not public official, not treasurer. Someone who stood near paper, locks, timings and movements. Wolfe nodded. Or near Cle himself. Remember Mr. Braden's doorway? Braden, under pressure, had admitted that when Cle ordered the ledger destroyed, another man had appeared in the doorway, and Cle had said, "Not now, the hour can wait." That gave us phrase and presence, but not identity. I said, then maybe Rowan was the hand, but not the mind, Pike the lock, but not the author, and somebody else is still conducting. Wolfe closed his eyes. Yes. At 8:58 he sent me to the stoop again. This was becoming an indignity. There is something unhealthy about taking an appointment with a gunshot, especially when you are not certain whether you are watcher, witness, or decorative target. Kramer had men on the block again, though fewer in sight and more in doorways. The neighborhood by then had ripened into disciplined curiosity. Windows held shadows. A taxi slowed twice and got nothing for it. The doorman across the street was back, trying to seem bored and achieving the opposite with commitment. I stood on the stoop with my collar up and my temper balanced. At 9:10 the shot came. It was as before, sharp, flat, and close enough to seize the air. Heads turned. Someone at the far end of the block cursed. The doorman flinched with professional restraint. I spun, but before I could even hit the front door, the bell inside had already sounded. That was new enough to earn speed. I went in at once. Fritz was in the hall with outrage on his face. Theodore emerged from the front room, as if expecting civilization to apologize. From the office Wolfe's voice came, deep and controlled. Archie. I went in. He was behind his desk. On the blotter before him lay an envelope of cream stock. He had not opened it. I said, "That was fast." "Yes," Wolfe said. Fritz heard the bell almost simultaneously with the shot. He opened the door to find no one, and this envelope on the threshold. Fritz, from behind me, said, "No one." I picked it up. Block print again, addressed simply, Nero Wolfe. "Read it," Wolfe said. I slit it with the desk knife and unfolded the sheet. It said, "You have named the lock, not the hand." For 1 full second, nobody spoke. Then Theodore said, "That is smug." I looked at him. "You have a talent for summary." Wolfe's eyes were fixed on the note. I handed it to him. He read it once and laid it flat on the blotter, as if by pressure alone he might wring identity from the ink. Saul entered from the front room, got the note from me after Wolfe had finished with it, and scanned it. "They know," he said. "Yes," Wolfe said. I said, "Not just that we're close, that we separated roles." Wolfe nodded once, which means either Pike has spoken, Rowan watches us, or the author has another eye nearer than either. That last possibility did not improve the office. I went back to the stoop. 2 of Kramer's men were converging from opposite directions, each annoyed that the other had not been more useful. Neither had seen who dropped the envelope. One had noticed a bicyclist turn too quickly at the corner just after the shot. The other had noticed that his colleague noticed too late. That was the sum of police glory. Kramer arrived in 9 minutes with Pearlie and enough temper to heat the hall. He read the note, looked at Wolfe, and said, "You naming locks now?" Wolfe ignored the tone and not the question. Pearlie asked where the envelope had been found. Fritz showed him. Threshold, bell, stoop, and doorframe were examined with the loyal futility such moments deserve. If the sender had wanted us to know only the message and not the method, he had spent no more than necessary. Kramer said, "You've got something, and you're feeding it to me in homeopathic doses." Wolfe said, "The note implies that we have correctly identified one participant as instrumental but not primary." Kramer stared. "English. Pike, maybe mechanism," I said. "Or access, not the whole show." Kramer swung to Wolfe. "Pike." Not a question. He had the name now. From us or elsewhere. "Yes," Wolfe said. "And the hand." "We are considering one Calvin Rowan." Pearlie's head turned. Kramer's too. "Who?" Machinist. Former associate of Pike. Possibly vanished. Possibly not. Kramer snapped at Pearlie. "Get on it." And Pearlie went to the hall telephone, with pleasure at having something that sounded like movement. After Kramer had exhausted his first layer of noise, he said, "You think Rowan sent this?" Wolfe shook his head. "Number, I think the author of this note is the same person who authored the theater. That is not necessarily the mechanic." "Then why write it?" That was worth answering. And Wolfe did, because it is argumentative. Until now our correspondent has directed, warned, summoned, counted. This note corrects, therefore it is personal. Kramer scowled. "You saying he's thin-skinned?" "Yes." That sat there a moment. Even Kramer could appreciate vanity when it might help him. When he had gone again, taking Pearlie and his impatience with him, the office settled back into its own gravity. Fritz returned to the kitchen. Theodore withdrew, having contributed as much as society could reasonably ask of him. Saul stayed, because he was right to. I looked at the note on Wolfe's desk and said, "You're pleased. Number." Then the look means something else. It means our correspondent has committed an error. "By correcting you?" "Yes." "How?" Wolfe leaned back. "A man who controls timing and sequence may remain invisible indefinitely if he resists the temptation to answer. This one has answered. He wants not only to conduct the drama, but to be appreciated for conducting it correctly." Saul nodded. "Pride." "Yes," I said. "Pike doesn't strike me as proud. Careful, yes. Rowan may be resentful, but this is literary vanity." "Exactly," Wolfe said. "The author of that note is not content to hide in hardware. He requires witness." I glanced again at the line. "You have named the lock, not the hand." Whoever wrote it wanted us to know we were close enough to touch one piece of the mechanism, and still foolish enough to miss the thing that moved it. That wasn't merely warning. It was correction. A man who corrects Nero Wolfe in writing either has courage, madness, or a very poor sense of history. Wolfe said, "Tomorrow you will find every surviving person who knew Pike and Rowan together on Cle. Related work. Not suppliers only. Warehouse men, supers, old porters, building janitors, watchmen, anyone whose job brought them near locks, shutters, alarm clocks, service doors, timed releases, or improvised mechanisms. Somewhere among them is the witness who saw one man as the front and the other as the back." "And the mind?" I asked. Wolfe's gaze went to the note again. "The mind," he said, "has just rung my bell." That line would have satisfied me more if I had not also believed it. The new shot had sounded at 9:10 as faithful as malice. The new note had come to Wolfe himself, and whoever sent it wanted us to know that while we may have named one useful part of the machine, we had not yet laid hands on the thing that moved. There are many ways to challenge Nero Wolfe. Most are loud and stupid. This one answered back, and that made it dangerous in a way bullets alone never manage. Chapter 8. The fifth addressed the next note arrived at 10:12 in the morning by ordinary messenger, which was somehow more insulting than the dramatic methods. I was at my desk sorting the names Saul and I had collected on Pike and Rowan from warehouse men, janitors, and one retired shutter installer who had spent 20 minutes recalling the moral decline of brackets before giving me anything useful. Wolfe was behind his desk, having descended from the orchids with the composed expression of a man who had accepted the existence of criminals but not their manners. Fritz had just brought coffee. Theodore was upstairs, where leaves and roots still obeyed rules. The messenger was a boy in a cap and gloves too thin for the weather. He handed me the envelope, said, "For Mr. Wolfe," and departed with the speed of youth and good sense. Cream stock again, block printing again. But when I opened this one, the contents differed. There was no warning sentence, no correction, no arithmetic, only an address. 417 River Foundry Lane, nothing else. I read it twice, then handed it to Wolfe. He looked at it, set it flat on the blotter, and said, "Archie, find it." I went to the phone and found it by stages. It took one city desk clerk, one old insurance map office, and a long-suffering man in a tax records branch, who objected to both my voice and the hour. River Foundry Lane was not much of a street now. It had once been a service cut near the river warehouses, west of 11th, half industrial, half forgotten, and mostly lost under newer numbering and older neglect. Number 417 had been, according to a tax map, not yet fully surrendered to progress, a print shop 20 years ago. Owned by Cle, I asked the clerk. No current listing. Passed. He grunted through paper. No public sale in the chain, you'd notice. Long abandoned commercial holding, tax delinquent 3 years. That brought me back to the office with more appetite than certainty. I said, "Print shop near the river, abandoned. Not one of the sold addresses, and not publicly lively." Wolfe nodded. "Good. It is the 5th address." "The 5th what?" "The 5th summons point. The others were reminders attached to old transactions. This one is a destination." "That sounds cheerful." "Number call, Mr. Kramer." Kramer arrived in 14 minutes with Pearlie, and enough suspicion to warm the room. He read the note, demanded to know why the sender had abandoned literature, and objected when Wolfe declined to speculate for free. Still, he understood the essential point quickly enough. If we had been handed an address instead of a phrase, someone either wanted us there or wanted us to know we had been there too late. Wolfe said, "Mr. Kramer, you will go." Kramer stared. "I'll what?" "You will go, Archie, and Mr. Panzer will accompany you. You won't." Number Kramer's face darkened. "You get the note, you get the address, and I go climb around a river ruin while you sit here drinking beer," he deduces. Kramer swung toward me. "One of these days." "Yes," Wolfe said. "Go now, please, before your eloquence decays further." That did it. Kramer took Pearlie and me and Saul downtown and west into a part of Manhattan that always feels as if the city had stopped admitting it in public. River Foundry Lane was a narrow, grim service way between blank warehouse walls and fenced lots, with the river wind slipping through it like a knife, with no respect for coats. Number 417 stood back from the lane behind a sagging iron gate, chained but not locked. The building was brick, narrow, fronted, and had once intended dignity by means of arched windows. It had not succeeded. 2 panes were boarded, 1 cracked, and the faded painted sign above the loading door still showed the ghost of lettering, Merritt and Blake Printing. Kramer looked at it and said, "If this turns out to be a joke, I'll arrest half the island." "That should improve morale," I said. The front lock had been forced years ago and repaired badly. Saul went first with a flashlight, Pearlie behind him, then Kramer and me. The air inside had the layered smell of dust, river damp, old paper, and recent oil. That last smell made us all stop. "Recent," Saul said. "Yes," I said. The front room had once been a print office. Scarred counter, built in shelves, iron hooks, and the stripped outlines where presses or cabinets had stood. Dust lay thick on most surfaces, and thin where it should not have been. Somebody had used the place recently, and carefully. We spread out. The rear room had more. There was an oilcloth spread over a long work table, where no table should have been this clean. On it lay bits of scrap metal, a spring housing, 2 cut lengths of wire, and a steel mounting plate, drilled for bracket screws. On the floor beneath were filings, bright among the dust. A crate by the wall held timing springs wrapped in wax paper. Another held small screws, pins, and brass collars of the kind Pike sold, and Rowan would have improved. Pearlie gave a low whistle. Kramer said, Workshop. Saul shook his head. Temporary one. Set up to assemble, not stay. I walked farther in. Against the north wall, pinned to corkboard, was a city map. That improved everything and nothing. The map had circles in red pencil around Barrow Street, East Hook Wharf, Orchard Lane, West 35th, and 3 other addresses from Pike's Lock. Change list. One of them was the 12th Avenue boarding house, another the Harlem warehouse. The newest mark, darker than the rest, circled River Foundry Lane itself. I called the others. Kramer stood before the map, hands on hips. He's been plotting them. Yes, Saul said, or rehearsing. I looked closer. Some lines connected the addresses, not straight routes, but sequences. Dates penciled small beside certain circles. The 14th of April, the 19th of September, the 2nd of June, the very dates from the notes, and Braden's missing page. Pearlie said, "That enough for you, Inspector?" "It's enough for me to keep looking." We did. There were fresh footprints in the dust, but the floor had been deliberately scuffed in places. A stove in the back had ashes no more than 2 days old. In one corner, a folding cot had been used, and then stripped. In another, near a broken window patched with cardboard, stood something that startled me by its quiet obscenity. A canary cage. Inside it, on the little papered floor, lay a dead canary. For a moment I merely stared. Then I called Saul, not because he liked birds, but because the thing had the unmistakable air of meaning. He came, looked once, and said, "Hell." Kramer joined us and frowned. "What's that for?" "Ask Wolfe," I said. The cage was clean, except for the dead bird. Fresh seed still lay in the tray. Water in the cup had not yet fully clouded. "It had not been dead long," Pearlie muttered. "That's cold." "No," I said, "that's communication." We searched on. The hidden drawer was Saul's find. In the rear room there was a low old cabinet built into the wall, with 3 shallow drawers visible and one shallower space beneath that looked like trim. Saul knelt, ran a finger under the lower lip, pressed inward, and a concealed floor drawer slid out a few inches with a wood. On, wood sigh. Inside were 3 things: a folded torn page of cream ledger paper, a packet of blank cream stationery cut to the same size as the anonymous notes, and a small metal box containing 3 messenger receipts, all blank. I lifted the torn page carefully. Braden had not exaggerated its ugliness. Dates in one column, amounts in another, shorthand marks for properties in the left margin, and notations to the right. There they were, a line marked J, another clerk, and another, written in the same narrow hand, keeper of the hour. I read aloud the first line I could make out. The 14th of April, BS, 2000 J. The next, partly smudged, gave the September date and East Hook mark. Another, the 2nd of June and Orchard. It was all there, or enough of it. Cle's ugly little index of timed corruption. Kramer took a step closer. "That Braden's page?" "Yes," I said, "unless the city started printing twins." Pearlie bent over the blank stationery packet. "Sami stock," Saul nodded. "Looks it," I said. "Bag everything." Kramer barked at Pearlie for envelopes and gloves, though Pearlie had already produced both. The man does good work when not being supervised aloud. While they packaged the page and stationery, I looked again at the cage. The dead canary annoyed me more than the map. A map is planning. A dead bird in a cage is commentary. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was where we had left him, installed behind the desk in the old office, with the bullet hole still above the globe and a glass of beer by his elbow. He looked at our faces and knew at once we had not merely found dust. I gave him the report straight through: the print shop, the work table, the springs, the map, the hidden drawer, the torn page, the blank stationery, and the canary. At the bird, his eyes narrowed. "At last," he said, "the sender has attempted wit." "That was wit?" I asked. "Bad wit, therefore deliberate." Kramer, who had come with us to hear Wolfe say something useful and perhaps embarrass himself, said, "What's a dead canary supposed to mean?" Wolfe looked at him as if the answer were beneath. No one except perhaps the police. A sermon, he said. Kramer blinked. A what? A sermon. Someone wishes to say that all the men in this affair are birds who sing when frightened. That silenced the room for a second. Then Saul said, Braden. Yes. And Voss, Crofton, Tormey, Berrin. Yes. Summoned, panicked, made to remember, made to sing. The canary in the cage is the author's opinion of them. I said, that's nasty. Certainly. Kramer grunted. Or maybe it's just a dead bird. Wolfe's gaze shifted to him. Then your years in homicide have been wasted more completely than I feared. That ended Kramer's contribution for the moment. I handed over my written copy of the torn page contents, as far as we could read them. Wolfe studied it. Then he looked at the blank stationery packet and asked, fingerprints. Pearlie, who had come in behind us carrying the evidence with more reverence than Kramer ever does, answered before the inspector could. Lab's working the stationery box and the drawer plate now, but there's one thing already. A print on the inner lid of the metal box matched a set Kramer had pulled off old supplier records this afternoon. Kramer scowled. He dislikes being preempted by competence, Wolfe said. Whose? Pearlie said. Not Pike. That sharpened all of us. Cal Rowan, Pearlie said. It sat there. I looked at Wolfe. He looked not surprised but confirmed, which is his preferred relation to facts. Kramer said. So Rowan's alive. Probably, Wolfe said. And in your nice print shop. Probably. And Pike. Unknown. Kramer slammed a palm lightly on the desk. Unknown hell. Pike and Rowan were in business. Pike knows the hardware. Rowan's print is on the box, and now we've got Braden's ledger page back, and enough note stock to write sermons to the boroughs. I'm picking up Pike. Wolfe nodded once. Yes, you should. Kramer blinked at the lack of resistance. But Wolfe said, do not mistake proximity for authorship. There you go again. Yes, Mr. Rowan's print on the stationery box proves Rowan handled note stock. It does not prove he wrote notes, chose targets, staged Mr. Braden or conceived the canary. Kramer's mouth tightened. You still think there's another one? Of course there is. Because the page records functions judge, clerk, keeper of the hour. Because Pike is access, Rowan mechanism, and our correspondent still displays too much selection, memory, and vanity to be merely the mechanic. Because the map marks not only old addresses but sequence. And because a man who leaves a dead canary is not merely hiding, he is commenting. I said, so Rowan touched the paper, but the writer still wants applause. Yes, Pearlie, who had more brains than rank, said, then Rowan may be the hand. Wolfe inclined his head. Quite possibly. And Pike the lock, I said. Yes. Kramer stared from one of us to the other, as if the entire city had developed private terminology to irritate him. And the mind. Wolfe's eyes drifted to the bullet hole above the globe and back to the torn page. The mind, he said, is someone who has now lost control of one piece? You mean Braden's page? Yes, it was retrieved and stored, not destroyed. That implies the author still needed it. Needed it for what? I asked. To verify memory, perhaps, or to force compliance later, or because one line matters more than the others. Keeper of the hour, Saul said. Yes. I looked at the copied lines again, Judge. Clerk keeper. 3 payments, 3 functions, 3 dates matching the notes. If Cle had paid for paper to move, permits to survive, and hours to be kept, then the corruption had not been casual. It had been orchestrated, Wolfe said. Archie, the print shop is not merely a hideout. It is a workshop and archive. Someone returned there repeatedly. That means he trusted its obscurity. Find out why that building was never sold, never openly listed, and never attached publicly to Cle. There is a reason it remained outside the visible chain. Kramer snorted. Tax, delinquent reason. Wolfe ignored him. Also, I want Rowan's history reopened from the day he drifted south. He did not drift, he withdrew. Saul nodded. I'll get on it, Kramer said. I'll get Pike first. Yes, Wolfe said, And if Mr. Pike becomes talkative, do try not to interrupt him with triumph." Cramer made a sound I will not reproduce and left, taking Pearlie and the evidence. When the door had shut, the office went quieter than before, which in that room usually means the case has moved closer to the center. I said. "Well." Wolfe leaned back. The fifth address was a gift, from vanity, from impatience. The sender wished us to find the page, the map, the canary, and Rowan's print, but not everything. That's generous. Number calculated. I frowned. Why show us Rowan? Because either Rowan is expendable, or Rowan is being advanced one step ahead of the true center. The hand, not the mind. Yes. I looked at the place on the desk where the torn page had rested before Cramer carried it away. "Then we're close." Wolfe's lips moved slightly, not enough to count as a smile. "No," he said. "We are merely no longer blind." That was less satisfying than I wanted, which usually means Wolfe was right. The abandoned print shop had held recent work, old planning, Braden's stolen page, a cruel little sermon in feathers, and stationery for all the anonymous notes. It had given us Rowan physically, Pike indirectly, and the whole sequence laid out on a wall like a tutor's diagram. But it had also told us something worse. Whoever had been running the game was now willing to let us see part of the machinery. And a man does not do that unless he believes the hand can be sacrificed, without losing the hour. Chapter 9. The riddle of the fourth shot. Inspector Cramer wanted Cal Rowan at once, which was natural and therefore incomplete. By 10:30 the next morning, he was in Wolfe's office with Pearlie Stebbins behind him, and impatience all over him, like bad tailoring. The abandoned print shop had yielded Rowan's fingerprint on the stationery box, timing springs on the work table, Miles Braden's torn ledger page in a hidden drawer, and enough evidence of recent use to keep 3 policemen happy and 1 district attorney noisy. For Cramer, that meant one thing: arrest the machinist, squeeze the locksmith, and let the law improve itself by momentum. For Wolfe, it meant temptation. He dislikes solutions that arrive too cleanly. He distrusts them on principle and often on evidence. Saul Panzer was in the yellow chair by the shelves. I was at my desk with a notebook open and a neck that had begun to recognize the posture of impending explanation. Wolfe sat behind his desk, immense and settled, with a glass of beer by his elbow and the bullet hole still above the globe behind him like a rude punctuation mark. Cramer put both fists on the desk. "I've got men looking for Rowan. I'm taking Pike," Wolfe said. Number. Cramer blinked. "No." Number. "The devil, you mean?" "No. I mean precisely that. You may arrest whom you please. Of course the city pays for your impulses. But if you arrest Mr. Pike now, you will get caution. If you arrest Rowan, assuming you find him, you may get mechanics. I prefer architecture." Pearlie's mouth twitched. Cramer's ears improved in color. "We've got Rowan's print on the notebox," he said. "Yes." "We've got Pike tied to the hardware." "Yes." "We've got Braden's ledger page in Rowan's hideout." "Yes." "And you want to sit here drinking beer?" "Yes." That landed badly, which was one reason Wolfe used it. Cramer drew breath for a better explosion. But Wolfe lifted one finger and said, "The fourth shot," that checked him, not stopped him, but checked him. Wolfe said, "Mr. Rowan may certainly have built the device. Mr. Pike may certainly have supplied or adapted the parts, but the fourth shot, the one fired inside my office, was impossible unless the device entered this house before 9:10 that required access. Not merely knowledge, not merely timing. Access, if Pike and Rowan remained outside, they could not place the apparatus themselves. Therefore, one of two things is true. Either one of them entered unnoticed and unremarked, which none of your evidence supports, or the apparatus was carried in by someone already admitted." Pearlie said quietly, "Braden." Wolfe nodded. "Yes." Cramer swung toward him and back. "Braden, that string bean." "Yes." "He came begging for help." "He came to be seen," Wolfe said. I said, "and he carried a document case." "That got all of them," Cramer said. "What document case?" I turned pages in my notebook, brown imitation leather, cheap handle. He had it under his arm the night he first came. I remember because he kept edging it closer with his foot whenever Wolfe pressed him. He said it held papers. "You didn't check it," Kramer demanded. "That criticism gains nothing by repetition," Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin's omission, though regrettable, was enabled by design. Mr. Braden arrived frightened, timely, and dull enough to disarm suspicion. He brought a case that fit his role exactly. That is not accident. It is staging. Kramer stared at him. "You're saying Braden carried the firing device into this house?" "Yes." "Knowingly, partly," Wolfe said. "Not fully." That was the key difference, and Wolfe valued such things. So did I when I had enough breath. I said, "He knew he was being sent here for a reason. He did not know the whole reason." Saul nodded. "Fear gives obedience. It doesn't require explanation," Wolfe said. "Mr. Braden received a note ordering him to come here or be counted among the dead. He obeyed. He also retained, perhaps, the childish hope that by reaching me he would gain protection that made him ideal. He would carry what he was told to carry, enter where he was told to enter, and behave like a victim while serving as courier," Pearlie said. "So Pike or Rowan gave him the case, or arranged that he receive it," Wolfe said, "or persuaded him it contained papers necessary to his own safety. The variation is unimportant. The essential fact is this: the impossible fourth shot became possible because we admitted its delivery. That sat in the room with weight. Kramer did not like it because it was neat, and because it made the whole business feel more personal than police prefer. He said, "All right, suppose Braden carried it. Then what?" Wolfe leaned back slightly. "Then, while speaking to me, or while shifting papers, or while moving the case near the chair, he transferred the concealed apparatus into the lower vent recess, or allowed it to be placed there by prior arrangement. Compact enough, disguised enough, and brought in under the cover of papers and nerves. The timer was already set, or nearly so. He left. The shot followed. Later, the device was recovered, the note under the globe discovered, and the false revolver thrown through the front room window to complete the deception." I said, "The mechanism we already had. The courier is the missing piece." "Yes." Kramer rubbed his face with one hand. "Then why not pick up Braden first?" "Because," Wolfe said, "Mr. Braden is not the author of the scheme. No. Number he is a frightened errand carrier with half knowledge and poor judgment, useful, compromised, and morally shabby, but not the architect. That was one of the things about Wolfe. He can despise a man accurately without overcharging him," Kramer said. "Then who?" Wolfe answered at once. "Evan Pike." That landed harder than I expected. Not because it was a shock, but because hearing Wolfe say it turned inference into shape. Kramer stared. "I thought Rowan was your mechanic." "He is. And Pike is the lock." "Yes. And now Pike is also the hand." "No," Wolfe said. "He is the mind." I wrote that down, though it didn't need the help. Wolfe put one hand flat on the blotter. "Consider the pattern. The notes do not merely threaten. They summon by memory. Each early note contains a date and address tied to a Cle property transfer, and each recipient had signed or witnessed papers connected to that transaction. That requires knowledge, not simply of devices but of old paper, old rolls, and old cowardice." Mr. Pike stood in the margins of those transactions repeatedly. Locks, keys, witness lines, access, attestation. He was present not grandly, but habitually. "Routine," I said. "Yes," Saul said, "and Rowan. Mr. Rowan appears where mechanics are needed, custom brackets, timer housings, altered release plates, delayed closures he built. He did not choose." Pearlie said, "That's still a lot to hang on Pike." Wolfe turned his head. "Mr. Stebbins, I am not hanging it merely on his occupation. I am hanging it on sequence, authorship, vanity, and opportunity." Mr. Pike knew the Cle properties. The men tied to them, the small functions by which money and permits moved. He also had access to a machinist bitter enough to build what was needed. I said, Rowan hated Cle. Almost certainly, Wolfe said. Bitterness is raw material. Pike used it. Kramer frowned. Used it for what? Blackmail. I still haven't seen payment. A fair objection, Wolfe said, because the payment stage was not yet complete. The early notes were summonses. The nightly shot trained fear publicly. Braden's surviving ledger page was flushed into the open and stolen. The print shop held the page, the note stock, and the map because the process was still ripening. Pike was preparing to blackmail the survivors fully, one by one, after fear had matured into obedience. I said, that's why the page wasn't burned. It was leverage. Yes, and the canary. A comment, Wolfe said. Pike's opinion of frightened men who sing when pressed. Vanity again. That pleased me because I had hated the bird on instinct and prefer my instincts rewarded, Kramer said. You keep saying vanity. A locksmith. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. A man overlooked for years, standing in margins while bankers certified, politicians carried. Treasurers balanced, and builders strutted, often develops a concealed hunger to direct. Mr. Pike's modesty is not humility, it is climate. That was a good line, I let it live. Saul said, and Rowan? Rowan built the devices and likely believed, or was encouraged to believe, that the old Cle corruption was being reopened for justice, revenge, or both. Pike, more practical, saw money. That is why the note sequence is elegant, while the hardware is merely competent. One mind selected the targets, another hand built the machinery. Kramer grunted. Then Rowan's expendable. Precisely, which is why his print remained on the stationery box. That took a second, then Pearlie said, You think Pike let us see Rowan? Yes, Kramer swore. Softly, but with feeling, I said. Pike advances, Rowan one step in front of himself. Same thing he did with Braden, only cleaner. Yes, Wolfe said. It is his preferred arrangement. Others carry exposure, he carries sequence. That was when Kramer realized Wolfe had been moving towards something more than a theory, he said. All right, suppose you're right. Where's Pike now? Wolfe said. Coming here. Kramer's head came up. What? I sent for him. When? This morning. You sent for the man you think is running the whole show, and didn't tell me. Number. Why? Because if I had told you, you would have done something loud. Mr. Pike is vain in a concealed way. He has already corrected me by note, sacrificed one workshop, and watched us separate lock from hand. He will come, if invited to hear my next inference, provided he still believes himself underestimated. Pearlie almost smiled. Kramer did not. I'll put men outside. Please do, invisibly, if possible. By 3:50 the office had the atmosphere of a court hearing and the furniture of a trap. Kramer stood by the window. Pearlie had the chair near my desk. Saul remained by the shelves. Braden, at Wolfe's insistence, sat pale and shrinking in a red leather chair, looking like a man who had finally understood the shape of the stage on which he had been placed. He whispered once, Why am I here? So you can hear the use you were put to, I told him. At 4:02 the bell rang. I went to the hall and opened the door. Evan Pike stood on the stoop neat as ever, hat in hand, coat buttoned correctly, spectacles catching a dull October light. He looked past me first, toward the hall interior, and only then at my face. A man does that when he expects a room and fears an audience. Mr. Goodwin. Mr. Pike, come in. I took his coat. He said nothing more. When he stepped into the office and saw Kramer, Pearlie, Saul, Braden, Wolfe and me all in place, the mildness shifted. Not much, but enough, Wolfe said. Good afternoon, Mr. Pike. Sit down. Pike sat. Silence held for a moment. Wolfe likes the outline before the color. Then he said, Mr. Pike, the fourth shot was the key. It required entry. Rowan could build the apparatus. You could supply or advise. But unless one of you had learned to walk through my house unseen, neither of you could have placed it yourselves. Therefore you used a courier already admitted. Mr. Braden carried the device in a document case, under terror and half-knowledge, and served as delivery. Pike's eyes moved once to Braden. That was all. It was enough. Braden made a small sound as if something inside him had dropped. Wolfe continued. Mr. Rowan built your devices. You selected your targets. You knew the old Cle addresses, the old signers, the witness lines, the certification marks, and the quiet functions by which the transactions had moved. When Braden's surviving ledger page became reachable, you saw your opportunity. You revived Cle's buried corruption one name at a time, and used Rowan's bitterness, Braden's fear, and your own patience to blackmail the survivors, Pike said quietly. That is an imaginative construction. No, Wolfe said. It is an exact one, Kramer said, and Rowan's print is on the stationery box. Pike turned his head slightly toward him, and then back to Wolfe with a look that was almost pity and entirely contempt. Wolfe said, "The notes are yours. The sequence is yours. The canary was yours. Rowan is the hand. You are the lock and the chooser together. You made the machine." Pike still said nothing. Wolfe leaned forward half an inch. Mr. Voss because he certified, Mr. Tormey because he carried permits, Mr. Crofton because he balanced, Mr. Berin because he patched later paper over earlier, rot, Mr. Braden because he kept what he should have destroyed, and me because, once the sequence ripened, you wanted witness. Pike's mouth thinned. You flatter yourself. Do I? Then why the note to me reading, "You have named the lock, not the hand"? That did it. Very little showed, unless you knew Pike's kind. But I had learned enough. The hands remained still, yet the jaw set. The mildness lost one layer. For the first time the man in the locksmith's coat looked like what he had been all along, a secondary figure who had spent too many years resenting primaries. "You had named only half of it," he said. "No one moved," Wolfe said, softly. Yes. Pike realized it too late. Not a confession in the vulgar sense, but enough. With Wolfe, enough is often more dangerous than a full speech. Kramer came half out of his chair. Pearlie had already shifted his weight forward. Wolfe said, "Mr. Rowan built your devices, and likely believed he was reopening old crimes for justice or revenge. You, less sentimental and more intelligent, saw payment. That is why the torn ledger page was kept rather than destroyed. That is why fear was cultivated before demands. You were ripening them." Pike looked at him and said, "Cle ripened them years ago. I only rang the bell." That was the thing itself. Kramer was on him at once. Pearlie beside him. Pike did not resist. Men like him survive by stillness too long to bolt gracefully. As they took him up, he looked once at Wolfe and said, "You still haven't got Rowan." "No," Wolfe said, "but now I know where he stopped being useful." Pike's mouth moved, perhaps toward a smile, and perhaps toward bitterness. Then Kramer and Pearlie took him out. When the door had shut, the room felt both emptier and more dangerous. Braden was breathing too fast. Saul looked satisfied in the restrained way only Saul can manage. Wolfe sat back as if the furniture had finally resumed its proper function. I said, "You're not finished." "Number, because Rowan is still out." "Yes, and because Pike wasn't the whole hand either. Number Pike was the chooser, organizer, and blackmailer. Rowan remains the mechanic, and perhaps more dangerous now because he may realize he was being advanced toward sacrifice." Braden whispered, "Will Rowan come after me?" Wolfe turned his head. "If he believes you can still identify him." "Yes." That did not help Braden, which was just. Saul said, "Then Rowan doesn't know Pike's been taken." "Not yet," Wolfe said, "but he will." I looked at the bullet hole above the globe and then at the now empty chair where Pike had sat so carefully. "The riddle of the fourth shot," I said, "was never the timer, number. It was access." "Yes." And the answer was that we admitted the delivery ourselves. Wolfe grunted. "A useful lesson. I disliked the price." That was as near as he would come to admitting offense in his own housekeeping. Pike was taken, Rowan was still out. The structure of the scheme was named at last. Rowan built the devices. Pike chose the old targets, the dates, and the pressure points. Pike used Cle's buried corruption, Rowan's bitterness, and Braden's fear to ring his 9-10 bell through half a dozen guilty lives. But the hour itself had not yet stopped, because Cal Rowan, the hand behind the lock, was still somewhere in New York with a machinist's silence. A grievance sharpened by use, and, if Wolfe was right, the unpleasant realization that he had helped build a theater in which the final expendable part might be him. Chapter 10. 9:10, no more by 8:30 that evening. Nero Wolfe had arranged his office the way a man arranges a courtroom when he already knows the verdict. That is one of the privileges of genius. He does not often move quickly because, by the time he does move at all, he has usually reduced the other fellow's choices to one bad one and another worse. I have seen murderers, blackmailers, embezzlers, and one assistant district attorney discover that too late, it never improves them. This time the courtroom was Wolfe's own office, with the bullet hole still above the globe, the old brownstone standing around it in offended dignity, and West 35th Street outside, waiting for 9:10 like an audience that had forgotten why it bought tickets. Inspector Kramer was in the red leather chair nearest the desk, broad, grim, and dressed for impatience. Pearlie Stebbins had the chair by my desk and a notebook on one knee. Sol Panzer stood by the shelves with his hands in his pockets, quiet enough to suggest he was either relaxed or deadly. And with Sol, those are neighbors. Fritz had been told to remain out of sight, but not out of hearing, which in his case meant he was restoring order in the kitchen while listening with moral precision through two doors. Theodore Horseman had refused attendance on the ground that men who mishandled time, metal, and language did not deserve orchids. I had some sympathy for that. Along the wall sat the earlier note recipients: Nathan Voss, the banker; Emil Crofton, the treasurer; Felix Tormey, the retired alderman; and Lawrence Berrin, the executive secretary. They looked like four men who had once believed their parts in Jonas Cle's affairs. Too small to survive memory, and had now discovered that memory can be sharpened and mailed. Miles Braden was upstairs under Saul's arrangement, partly for safety, and partly because Braden in full quantity was exhausting. Evan Pike was present under guard, seated to the left of Wolfe's desk, neat as ever, spectacles in place. His hands folded with the same dry care I had come to detest. He had already said enough to place himself beyond rescue, but not enough to save anyone else. Cal Rowan was still out. That was the one Lev Wire left in the room. We had Pike named as organizer and chooser, Rowan as mechanic, Braden as frightened courier, Cle's old corruption reassembled through dates and properties, the print shop found, the torn ledger page recovered, the canary interpreted, the vent mechanism understood. Yet 9:10 had not come for the day, and Rowan had not been taken. Until both happened, the thing still had breath in it. Wolfe sat behind the desk broad and motionless, one hand on the blotter, the other on the chair arm, as if the furniture had been built to argue his case for him. He had had his dinner on time. He had had beer. He had had an hour alone. That generally means danger for somebody else. At 8:30, he opened his eyes fully and said, "Mr. Kramer, your men." "Placed," Kramer said. "Where?" Kramer scowled because detail from him always feels like theft. One in the vestibule across the street, one at the east corner, one at the west, two in the sedan halfway down, another in the rear hall of the building opposite, and one on the roof with glasses. 3 more off the block in reserve. Wolfe nodded. "Adequate. That's the closest I get to gratitude." "Yes." Kramer accepted that because argument would only have lengthened the answer. Wolfe turned his gaze to the 4 men on the wall chairs. "Gentlemen, you are here not from courtesy, but because your memories are exhibits." Tormey shifted and said, "I still don't know why I'm being made to sit through this after 5 years." "Because," Wolfe said, 5 years did not rot the paper sufficiently." That disposed of him. Then Wolfe looked at Pike. "And you, Mr. Pike, are here because designs should be recited in the hearing of their author." Pike said nothing. His face was mild. His eyes were not. Wolfe began with terrible calm. Jonas Cle built warehouses, boarding houses, cheap flats, and complicated evasions. He used shell companies not merely to hold property, but to separate ownership from consequence. Through them he shifted addresses that later became keys: Barrow Street, East Hook Wharf, Orchard Lane, and others. Each transfer required small corrupt functions: certification, permits, balancing, corrected paper, replacement locks, controlled access. The men in this room each performed one or more of those functions and trusted their insignificance to preserve them. Crofton gave a dry motion with his mouth that might have become protest in a less accurate room. Wolfe ignored him. Cle also kept records beyond the formal ledgers. The torn page preserved by Mr. Braden was not ordinary bookkeeping. It was an operational extract, a list of timed payments tied to properties and functions. A judge, a clerk. The man marked only as keeper of the hour, dates corresponding to the later notes. Cle feared this page enough to order destruction. Mr. Braden, from greed or instinct, kept one piece. Braden was not there to flinch, which was merciful. Wolfe went on. Years later, that surviving page, or the knowledge that it survived, became the fuse. Mr. Pike, living in the margins of Cle's old transactions, had seen more than his superiors knew he had seen. He handled keys, witnessed lines, replacement locks, access, and afterthoughts. He also had available to him Mr. Rowan, a machinist capable of building timed releases, trigger mounts, shutter devices, and other concealed mechanisms. Mr. Rowan, I infer, also retained bitterness enough toward Cle and those around him to be useful. Saul said from the shelves, "That's the polite version." "Yes," Wolfe said. "The impolite one is less musical." Voss took off his glasses and polished them, though they did not need it. Barron stared fixedly at Pike as if trying to understand how a man he would once have passed without seeing had ended by owning half his fear. Wolfe continued. Mr. Pike recognized that every guilty man tied to those transfers could be made to pay, not merely by demand, which invites lawyers and denial, but by ritual. Therefore he designed a sequence, each night at 9:10 a gunshot, not lethal, but punctual. Theater. The next morning, a note naming a date and address from a Cle transaction, with just enough wording to make the recipient remember precisely where he had stood. The shot was public pattern. The note was private extortion. I said, "The bell and the summons." "Yes," Tormey muttered. "Extortion dressed as church." "Exactly," Wolfe said. Crofton asked, "Then why the shot inside your house?" Wolfe looked at him. "Because by then I had become inconvenient. Mr. Barron had consulted me. Mr. Pike understood interference had begun. The fourth shot, inside my own office, was therefore not merely continuation. It was warning," Cramer grunted, "and a damned clever one." "Yes," Wolfe said, "but it contained the decisive riddle. Mr. Rowan could build the device. Mr. Pike could design the deception, yet neither could place it in this house without access. That access came not by stealth, but by invitation. Mr. Braden entered carrying a document case, under terror and with half knowledge. Inside that case was the compact apparatus later mounted in my office vent. He served as courier while believing himself a petitioner. That was the indecency." Pike's jaw tightened. It was slight, but I had learned his scale. Wolfe's voice remained level. "The nightly shot was theater. The notes were extortion. The shot inside my house was a warning against interference. No one argued. Not even Cramer," Wolfe said. "The abandoned print shop completed the proof. There we found Rowan's fingerprint on the stationery box, the torn ledger page stolen from Braden, timing springs, scrap metal, the map of all prior addresses, and the dead canary." At that Tormey made a face. Barron looked ill. Voss stared at the carpet. Wolfe said, "The canary was not whim, it was commentary. Mr. Pike wished to say that all the men in this affair were birds who sang when frightened." Cramer muttered, "I still say it was a rotten joke." "Yes," Wolfe said, "bad wit is usually deliberate." Then he turned his eyes fully on Pike. But there was one mistake. Mr. Pike, you wrote riddles as if only you could solve them. Pike looked up. Wolfe went on, softer and somehow more dangerous. That is vanity, and vanity always leaves a footprint larger than the shoe. The room got very still at that. Pike's face remained controlled, but the hands had changed. The thumbs no longer rested naturally. They pressed. Kramer shifted. All right. Suppose that's all right. Pike's here, Rowan's still out. Why are we waiting for 9:10 like a radio program? Wolfe leaned back. Because Mr. Pike still believes in signals. That landed harder than the rest, I said. You think he'll try one? Yes, he has used the hour too often not to trust it. He has lost the print shop, lost the page, lost concealment, and likely lost Rowan's confidence as well. Under such pressure, a man of routine will attempt one final signal, to warn, to summon, or to command. Pike said quietly, You credit me with too much. No, Wolfe said, with exactly enough. Or to anyone Mr. Pike still hopes to direct. A light, a click, a dropped object, something timed to 9:10. He has educated himself into obedience to the hour. Pike almost smiled. It was an ugly expression because it came not from humor, but from private admiration of himself. Wolfe saw it and nodded once. Thank you. That was all. At 9:06, Wolfe said. Archie, front window. I went to the front room and took position behind the raised shade. Across the street, the apartment vestibule opposite looked ordinary enough, which is the best disguise for police and trouble alike. The parked sedan sat halfway down the block. The doorman opposite had been replaced by a cleaner, dark shape in the doorway. Nothing moved with meaning. Yet, at 9:08, I heard a floorboard behind me and knew without turning that Kramer had come to the hall. He breathes like a man who distrusts, hiding. At 9:09, the block seemed to hold itself. At exactly 9:10, there was no gunshot. Instead, there came a tiny, hard flash from the opposite vestibule, one brief blink of shuttered light, no more than a spark to anyone not waiting for it. I said, There. The street answered at once with movement. Two of Kramer's men were on the vestibule, before the blink had fully died. Another came from the parked sedan. Someone shouted. There was the scrape of a shoe, the thud of bodies meeting a wall, and then Kramer was past me and out the front door, with me after him because habit and curiosity are cousins. They had him in the vestibule against the inner wall, Cal Rowan. He was shorter and heavier than Pike, grey at the temples, shoulders thickened by years over tools, with the face of a man who had worked too long with metal and trusted none of it. One detective had his right arm pinned. Another had kicked away the small signaling lamp that had flashed at 9:10. Exactly, Kramer barked. Got him, one of the detectives said. Waiting in the vestibule with the lamp, timed it perfect. Rowan twisted once, not to escape, but to look across at the brownstone. That told me enough. Whatever the signal meant, he had expected someone there to understand it. We brought him over. In the office, Pike was now standing, though he had not moved far. The guard beside him looked pleased to have justification. Rowan stopped dead when he saw Pike. No speech at first. That was right for him. Silence had always been his stronger language. Then he looked at Wolfe. Wolfe said, Good evening, Mr. Rowan. Your punctuality no longer helps you. Rowan's mouth worked once, then he said in a rough voice, He said it was a signal to wait. There it was. Pike shut his eyes for 1 second, only one, but that was enough to count as collapse in a man built of restraint. Wolfe nodded. Yes, Mr. Pike trained you both. Wait for the hour, move at the signal, trust the sequence. He has lived by routine so long he mistook it for loyalty. Rowan turned his head toward Pike. You left my print. Pike opened his eyes. You left them everything else. That nearly got him hit. Rowan lunged half a step before the detectives took the motion away from him. Kramer snapped an order. Hands tightened. Rowan's face darkened with rage and injury together. Wolfe said, That will do, Mr. Rowan. You built the devices. Mr. Pike wrote the notes, chose the targets, and directed the sequence. You believed, perhaps, that old corruption was being reopened for justice or revenge. He was interested in payment. Rowan stared at Pike, not at Wolfe. Then he said, "I built the shutters, the vent mount, the lamp. The rest was his." Pike snapped, "Shut up." That was the last mistake he needed. Kramer said with pleasure, "He'll do anything but that." What followed was not melodrama. Because real unraveling rarely is, Rowan did not pour out everything like a guilty tenor. Pike did not make a grand confession. What happened instead was better. Wolfe asked exact questions. Rowan answered functions. Pike corrected by contempt. Kramer pressed. Pearlie took notes. Saul watched all the places where silence meant something, and little by little the whole machine stood up in the room. Jonas Cle had hidden proof of bribes inside property transfers and duplicate records. Pike, years later, recognized the pattern and saw what it meant. Every man tied to those transactions could be made to pay if fear were ritualized and timed. Rowan built the hardware: timers, brackets, shutter lamps, release mounts. Pike wrote the notes, picked the dates and addresses, staged the 9-10 shots, used Braden as a frightened courier into Wolfe's house, and prepared to extort the survivors one by one once panic had ripened. The shot inside the brownstone was meant to warn Wolfe off and prove reach. The dead canary was Pike's opinion of frightened men. The corrective note to Wolfe was Pike's vanity, and the final signal at 9-10 had been meant for Rowan. Wait, hold, trust the old sequence one more time. That was the thing itself. At last Kramer stood, drew a breath and said, "I've got enough." Wolfe nodded. "Yes." Kramer glared. "You could have given me Pike yesterday." "No," Wolfe said. "Yesterday you would have had parts. Tonight you have design." Kramer considered a reply, decided the men mattered more than the sentence, and took Rowan and Pike out with Pearlie and the others. The 4 earlier recipients went too, for statements, discomfort, or penance. Braden came down, saw Rowan, and almost sat on the floor from relief and horror together. Kramer took him also, not as a mastermind, but as what he was, a frightened fool who had carried one thing too many. Then the house was ours again, the front door shut. Silence came back in layers. In the kitchen, Fritz moved a pan with the grave precision of a man restoring civilization. Above us, the orchids slept in their regulated climate, unstained by locksmiths, signal lamps, or bad wit. He stood in the office and listened. 35th Street was silent. No shot at 9-10, no echo, no bell, no note on the threshold, just the ordinary city murmur, smaller now that the ritual had ended. I looked at Wolfe. He was still behind the desk, but the line of his shoulders had eased by perhaps half an inch, which with Wolfe counts as celebration. He reached for the beer, found it warm, and set it down with distaste. "Well," I said, 9:10, no more." "Yes, you sound relieved." "I am. That's nearly festive." He glared. "A criminal used my house as punctuation. Another borrowed my threshold as delivery. My wall was damaged. Mr. Kramer overvisited. Relief is the minimum compatible with health." That was fair enough. "And now?" I asked. "Now," he said, "you will see that the vent grill is properly restored, the bullet hole repaired tomorrow, and that Fritz sends beer fit to drink. Then I will go upstairs at the usual hour and discover whether the Cattleya on bench 3 has improved." I stared at him. "You end ritual blackmail on West 35th Street, and your reward is an orchid." "No," Wolfe said. "My reward is the end of gunfire." That, too, was fair enough. I started toward my desk, then stopped and looked back. The office without notes, inspectors, frightened clerks, or timed signals seemed to exhale. Wolfe had already picked up an orchid catalogue that had lain neglected for 2 days. And I knew the real ending, though he would never put it sentimentally. 35th Street had been given back its ordinary noises. Pike had mistaken routine for invisibility. Rowan had mistaken mechanism for revenge, and both had forgotten the one thing no criminal should ever forget about Nero Wolfe. He not only solves riddles, he resents being corrected by them. At 10 o'clock he rose, broad and deliberate, and headed for the door. "Archie." "Yes." "Come up to the plant rooms in 15 minutes. I may permit you to observe the improvement in bench 3. That," I said, "is the only explosion you tolerate." He paused, turned his head, and said, "Number ideas." Then he went out, toward orchids, beer, and the only kind of punctuality he has ever really trusted.